In the quiet hours when Johto's radio signals drift through midnight air, a different kind of story begins to unfold. The second generation of Pokémon carried secrets woven into every sprite, every musical note, every carefully placed trainer standing beneath lamplight in Goldenrod City, waiting for someone to notice the patterns hidden in plain sight before you drift off. Maybe tap subscribe for more gentle videos, and let me know where you're listening from tonight as we walk softly through the opening moments of Gold and Silver, where the introduction sequence chose to show Kanto Pokemon before revealing Johto's new creatures. The introduction screen displayed Shelders swimming through underwater currents, Magikarp leaping toward unseen heights, Lapras gliding across calm waters, Jigglypuff bouncing with characteristic cheerfulness, and Pikachu standing as the familiar bridge between generations. These were not random selections. The developers deliberately chose creatures from the first generation to appear before Johto's Pokemon materialized on screen, establishing immediately that Gold and Silver would function as direct sequels rather than standalone experiences. This marked the first and only time an introduction refused to spotlight new generational creatures first, a design choice that communicated the interconnected nature of Kanto and Johto before players encountered Professor Oak's radio show or stepped onto Route 29. The decision carried narrative weight, suggesting that 3 years had passed since Red's journey, and the world had continued evolving during that time. Jigglypuff's presence marked its second appearance in a Pokemon game introduction, having previously starred in Blue version's opening sequence. Pikachu similarly returned from Yellow version's introduction, where it had established itself as Ash Ketchum's companion in the anime and gradually ascended to franchise mascot status. The selection of these two Pokemon specifically created continuity across all three Kanto releases, while simultaneously preparing players for the revelation that Gold and Silver would allow travel between regions. No other creatures from the original 151 received this honor of appearing in multiple introduction sequences, making Jigglypuff and Pikachu's dual appearances particularly meaningful from a design perspective. The introduction screens for Gold and Silver contained subtle differences that required frame-by-frame comparison to notice. The starter Pokémon of Johto appeared briefly during the opening moments, their sprites changing between versions in ways that mirrored how all Pokémon in the National Pokédex displayed minor variations depending on which cartridge housed them. Chikorita's leaf appeared slightly different in Gold compared to Silver. Cyndaquil's flame pattern shifted in small but perceptible ways. Totodile's jaw positioning varied between the two games. These microscopic adjustments demonstrated the developer's commitment to version differences that extended beyond mere availability of certain species, creating parallel worlds that existed simultaneously on Game Boy Color cartridges around the globe. Following these opening images, a Charizard sprite appeared on screen with proportions that seemed exaggerated compared to its red and blue appearance. The head sat larger on its shoulders, giving the fire type an almost cartoonish quality that contrasted with the more refined sprite work surrounding it. This particular Charizard design rarely receives discussion in analyses of Gold and Silver's visual presentation, yet it represented the transition between generations in visual terms, a creature caught between the pixelated simplicity of first-generation sprites and the more detailed artwork that would define the Game Boy Color era. The oversized head created an impression of youthful energy rather than the imposing presence Charizard typically projected, perhaps intentionally chosen to represent the passing of time and the emergence of new heroes. The legendary Pokémon then materialized, with Ho-Oh soaring through clouds in Gold version, while Lugia descended beneath ocean waves in Silver. These scenes appeared completely different at first glance, one creature flying through sky, while another swam through depths, but closer examination revealed that both backgrounds shared identical composition with inverted color palettes. The clouds surrounding Ho-Oh became the ocean floor beneath Lugia when colors shifted from warm golds and oranges to cool blues and silvers. The sky behind the rainbow Pokémon transformed into the sea surrounding the diving Pokémon through simple color substitution. This mirroring technique emphasized the duality central to Gold and Silver's themes, two legendaries representing opposing elements while maintaining perfect symmetry in their presentation. Ho-Oh released a small trail of glittering light as it flew, sparkles that evaporated into the air like embers from sacred flames. Lugia generated powerful underwater currents with each movement, whirlpools spreading outward to suggest the immense strength required to navigate ocean depths. These animation details matched each Pokemon's transmedia representation established in films and promotional materials, Ho-Oh as the gentle guardian, bringing hope, and Lugia as the powerful beast capable of creating storms with wing beats. The visual language established here would persist throughout the franchise's history, defining how these legendaries appeared in subsequent games, movies, and merchandise. The speed difference between the two legendaries during their introduction sequences reflected their base stat distributions. Lugia moved faster across the screen because its speed stat reached 110 points compared to Ho-Oh's 90, a numerical advantage that translated into visible animation tempo. This attention to mechanical accuracy in cinematic presentation demonstrated the developer's commitment to consistency between gameplay systems and narrative elements. The biological justification existed within Pokédex entries as well, with Ho-Oh described as contemplative and graceful in flight, while Lugia embodied raw power and velocity beneath waves. The musical composition accompanying these legendary Pokémon marked a dramatic departure from Red and Blue's energetic opening theme. Instead of the frenetic melody that had defined Kanto's introduction, Gold and Silver presented a contemplative piece that moved slowly through chord progressions, allowing each note to breathe before transitioning to the next. This slower tempo communicated that the second generation represented a more mature experience, inviting players to appreciate quiet moments rather than rushing toward constant stimulation. The legendary duo's introduction music became iconic in its own right, frequently cited by fans as evidence that Johto offered a different kind of adventure compared to Kanto's straightforward journey. The relationship between the two versions extended beyond surface-level differences into the mechanical implementation of the games themselves. When players received their starter Pokémon from Professor Elm, the creatures they chose determined not only their initial companion, but also influenced which legendary Pokémon appeared more prominently throughout the narrative. Gold version naturally emphasized Ho-Oh's mythology through the Tin Tower storyline, while Silver focused attention on Lugia's connection to the Whirl Islands. This bifurcation created two distinct experiences that encouraged players to trade with friends or purchase both versions to appreciate the full scope of Johto's legends. The starter selection itself represented a significant evolution in Pokémon design philosophy. Chikorita, Cyndaquil, and Totodile formed the Grassfire Water Triangle established in Red and Blue, but their evolutionary paths introduced mechanics that hadn't existed in the first generation. Chikorita evolved into Bayleaf and the Meganium, a pure grass-type line that emphasized defense and special attack. Cyndaquil became Quilava before reaching its final form as Typhlosion, a pure fire type that specialized in speed and special attack. Totodile transformed into Croconaw, and finally Feraligatr, a pure water type focused on physical attack and defense. Each line maintained single typing throughout all three stages, a deliberate choice that distinguished Johto starters from their Kanto predecessors. The decision to keep starter lines pure typed rather than adding secondary types as they evolved represented a philosophical stance on the part of the development team. Charizard's Fire, Flying Combination, and Blastoise's pure water typing had created expectations about how starters should develop, but Gold and Silver rejected those assumptions in favor of simplicity. This choice allowed each starter to maintain a clear identity without the complexity of dual typing, making team building more straightforward for younger players while still providing strategic depth through move pool diversity. Professor Elm's laboratory in Newbarktown functioned as the player's introduction to Johto's Pokemon research community. Unlike Professor Oak, who maintained a well established laboratory with multiple assistants and ongoing projects, Elm operated a smaller facility with minimal staff and a singular focus on Pokemon breeding mechanics. This specialization reflected a deliberate narrative choice to position Elm as a younger researcher still building his reputation, contrasting with Oak's status as the preeminent authority in the field. The dynamic between these two professors would become central to Gold and Silver's story, with Elm frequently referring to Oak's expertise while simultaneously pursuing his own groundbreaking research into egg discovery and hatching. The first egg players received came from Elm's aid after visiting the Pokemon Center in Violet City, a seemingly minor event that actually introduced the breeding mechanic that would revolutionize competitive Pokemon play for years to come. This Togepi egg represented the first time players encountered Pokemon breeding as a deliberate game mechanic rather than speculation about where wild Pokemon originated. The egg required walking a specific number of steps before hatching, introducing a pedometer function that tied real world movement to in game progression. This mechanic would expand dramatically in later generations, but Gold and Silver established the foundation through a single mysterious egg gifted early in the adventure. Togepi itself carried significant cultural weight due to its prominence in the Pokemon anime, where it hatched from an egg found by Ash and his companions during their travels through the Orange Islands. The decision to make Togepi obtainable through breeding rather than wild encounter reflected the developers' awareness of the anime's influence on player expectations. By the time Gold and Silver released, Togepi had become synonymous with eggs and hatching in the Pokemon universe, making it the perfect ambassador for this new mechanic. Players who had watched Misty care for her Togepi on television could now experience a similar bonding process through the game's breeding system. The happiness system, introduced in Gold and Silver, added another layer of depth to trainer Pokemon relationships. Certain species could only evolve when their happiness reached maximum levels, a requirement that forced players to actively care for their Pokemon rather than simply grinding levels. Golbat's evolution into Crobat required maximum happiness, as did Chansey's transformation into Blissey. These evolutions couldn't be rushed through rare candies or experience points alone, demanding that players keep their Pokemon in the party, avoid letting them faint, give them vitamins and grooming items, and generally treat them as companions rather than tools. This system manifested the series' central theme about bonds between trainers and Pokemon in mechanical terms, rewarding players who invested emotional energy alongside strategic planning. The Pokegear device replaced the town map from Red and Blue, offering expanded functionality that transformed how players navigated Johto. The phone feature allowed trainers encountered en routes to call the player character with information about rare Pokemon appearances, requests for rematches, or simple conversation. This created the impression that Johto's trainer population existed as a living community, rather than static encounters waiting to be defeated once and forgotten. Certain trainers called at specific times or days, revealing Pokemon swarms or offering items that encouraged players to revisit earlier routes rather than proceeding in a linear fashion toward the Elite Four. The day and night cycle represented one of Gold and Silver's most significant innovations, dividing each in-game day into morning, day, and night periods that affected wild Pokemon encounters NPC availability, and even certain evolution conditions. Eevee could only evolve into S-bound during daylight hours with high happiness, while Umbreon required the same happiness level during nighttime. This temporal restriction added stakes to evolution decisions, forcing players to plan when they leveled up their Eevee, rather than triggering evolution through simple level gain. The cycle connected to the Game Boy Color's internal clock, meaning that playing at 2 in the morning yielded different experiences than afternoon sessions, encouraging varied play schedules. The internal clock's implementation created interesting technical challenges. The cartridge required a battery to maintain time when powered off, the same technology used to preserve save files, but now dedicated to tracking real-world time passage. This meant that gold and silver cartridges contained two batteries working simultaneously, one for save data and one for clock functionality. When these batteries eventually died years later, they created a subset of vintage cartridges that could still save but couldn't track time, breaking day-night cycles and preventing time-based evolutions. This hardware limitation would influence how future Pokémon games implemented real-time features. Route 29 connected New Barktown to Cherry Grove City, serving as the player's first experience with wild Pokémon encounters in Johto. The route's simple layout and low-level Pokémon population made it ideal for tutorial purposes, but it also contained a hidden detail that rewarded thorough exploration. An elderly man in Cherry Grove offered running shoes after the player completed a brief tutorial about navigating menus and checking the Pokégear. These shoes doubled movement speed and became essential for efficient travel, yet they weren't mandatory to progress, creating a situation where inattentive players might spend hours walking at default speed before discovering this quality of life improvement existed. Cherry Grove City itself functioned as Johto's version of Viridian City, a small settlement that served as gateway to the larger world beyond. The city's guide Gent offered tours and explanations of basic game systems, a character who existed purely to help new players understand mechanics without forcing veteran players to sit through mandatory tutorials. This design philosophy respected player agency, allowing those who wanted guidance to receive it while permitting experienced trainers to skip directly to the Pokémon Center and continue their journey. The optional nature of these tutorial systems would become standard practice in future Pokémon games. The rival character's introduction occurred differently depending on player choices, but regardless of approach, their first encounter happened in suspicious circumstances. This nameless trainer appeared near Professor Elm's laboratory after apparently obtaining a Pokémon through questionable means, creating immediate tension that distinguished them from Blue's straightforward rivalry. While Blue positioned himself as the player's equal, who happened to be Professor Oak's grandson, this new rival carried an air of mystery and potential danger, someone whose methods and motivations remained unclear throughout the early game. The decision to withhold their name during initial encounters reinforced this mysterious quality. This rival's lack of identity markers extended beyond simple namelessness into deeper character psychology. NPCs throughout Johto referred to trainers by name, creating a social network where everyone possessed clear identity except this one figure who moved through the world without anchoring themselves to place or people. This namelessness reflected their internal struggle with identity and belonging, themes that would gradually emerge as the story progressed. The contrast with Blue became stark when considering that Blue knew exactly who he was and what he wanted from the beginning, while the Gold and Silver rival seemed to be searching for something they couldn't quite articulate. The personality differences between these rivals manifested in battle dialogue and behavior. Blue spoke confidently about becoming champion and frequently reminded the player of their grandfather's status, but he never crossed into genuine cruelty. The Johto rival expressed themselves through aggressive language and physical intimidation. pushing the player character and making threats that felt more serious than Blue's competitive banter. This darker characterization created space for character development that couldn't occur with someone who started confident and remained that way throughout the journey. The unnamed rivals arc would eventually reveal them to be Silver, Giovanni's son, searching for identity after his father's disappearance. The revelation about Silver's parentage wouldn't occur until Fire Red and Leaf Green introduced explicit confirmation through NPC dialogue, but Gold and Silver contained subtle hints for observant players. The rivals' obsession with strength and power mirrored Team Rocket's philosophy, and their initial Pokémon was obtained through theft rather than Professor Elm's gift, echoing Giovanni's criminal methods. These narrative parallels establish thematic connections without requiring exposition, trusting players to recognize the archetypal relationship between a fallen crime lord and his wayward son, even if the game never stated it directly. The Sprout Tower in Violet City offered the first traditional dungeon experience in Johto, a multi-floor wooden structure where trainers dedicated to Bellsprout practiced their skills. The tower swayed with each movement, a visual effect that communicated its construction from living plants rather than conventional building materials. This swaying animation required careful sprite work to maintain the illusion of motion without causing eye strain or discomfort during extended exploration. The effect succeeded in creating atmosphere, making the tower feel alive and organic in ways that stone or metal structures couldn't match. The tower's name referenced the sprout-shaped weather vane atop its peak, but it also connected to Buddhist and Shinto religious architecture common in Japanese culture. The tower functioned as a training ground for monks seeking enlightenment through connection with Pokémon, specifically grass types that embodied growth and renewal. This religious undertone distinguished Sprout Tower from most Pokémon locations, which tended towards secular adventuring rather than spiritual practice. The monks inside spoke about discipline, patience, and harmony with nature, themes that resonated with Pokémon training's emphasis on partnership rather than domination. Defeating the Sage at the tower's summit rewarded players with Flash, a hidden machine that illuminated dark caves and also functioned as a move in battle. This dual utility defined HMs throughout Gold and Silver, creating tension between their necessity for exploration and their mediocre performance in combat. Flash reduced opponent accuracy, a useful effect in theory that rarely proved more valuable than simply attacking. Players who taught Flash to a team member sacrificed a move slot that could house something more powerful, forcing strategic decisions about whether to carry an HM user or navigate caves in darkness. This design created friction that later games would address by making HMs deletable or replacing them entirely with key items. The journey toward Violet City introduced wild Pokémon encounters that showcased Johto's new species while maintaining connections to Kanto. Sentret and Furret appeared on early routes, normal-type creatures that filled ecological niches similar to Rattata and Raticate. Hoothoot evolved into Noctowl, a normal flying type that paralleled Pidgey's line while incorporating time-based mechanics through nighttime evolution. These parallels weren't accidental, but rather demonstrated conscious design decisions to create familiar patterns that players could recognize, while still experiencing novelty through new creature designs and abilities. Sudowoodo's appearance blocking Route 36 created one of Gold and Silver's most memorable obstacles, a Pokémon disguised as a tree that refused to move until watered with the squirt bottle obtained in Goldenrod City. This represented the series' first encounter with a Pokémon blocking progression that couldn't simply be defeated or avoided, requiring a specific item obtained through completing an earlier quest. The squirt bottle came from the flower shop owner after resolving a subplot about the shop's health, creating a quest chain that rewarded exploration and NPC interaction rather than pure combat prowess. Sudowoodo's reveal as a rock type rather than grass type subverted player expectations established by its tree disguise. The decision to make Sudowoodo a unique encounter rather than a wild species that could appear naturally in grass emphasized its special status within Johto's ecosystem. Only one Sudowoodo existed per game cartridge, making it comparable to legendary Pokemon in rarity, despite its unremarkable stats. This created collection anxiety for players who preferred to save unique encounters in Pokeballs with specific properties, or who wanted to ensure they caught it. Before progressing too far, the battle couldn't be fled from, forcing players to either catch Sudowoodo or knock it out, with the latter choice meaning they would never encounter another one during that playthrough. The ruins of Alph introduced the Unown, mysterious Pokemon shaped like letters of the alphabet that appeared in 28 different forms. The ruins themselves predated Johto's modern settlements, ancient structures covered in pictographic writing that hinted at civilizations long vanished. Solving sliding tile puzzles caused Unown to appear in sealed chambers, creating the impression that these letter Pokemon served as guardians or messages from the past. The Unown report gradually filled in as players caught different letter forms, eventually spelling out messages in English that provided cryptic lore about the ruins' original purpose. The archaeological elements present in the ruins of Alph represented a departure from Kanto's relatively modern settings. While the first generation occasionally referenced ancient Pokemon through fossils, Johto integrated historical mystery into its present-day geography. The ruins suggested that human civilization in the Pokemon world extended back millennia, and that modern understanding of Pokemon remained incomplete despite Professor Oak's research. This created space for speculation about the relationship between ancient peoples and legendary Pokemon, themes that would expand dramatically in later generations through locations like Sinnoh's Celestica ruins and Unova's Relic Castle. The radio tower in Goldenrod City served as Johto's communications hub, broadcasting programs that affected wild Pokemon encounters and provided entertainment for the region's population. The Pokemon March Show increased wild Pokemon encounter rates when played on the Pokegear's radio function. The Pokemon Lullaby decreased encounter rates, allowing players to control random battle frequency without using repulse. These subtle mechanical benefits rewarded players who experimented with radio stations and discovered their effects, creating systems within systems that increased gameplay depth without requiring explicit tutorials. Professor Oak's radio show aired in Goldenrod, cementing his transition from pure research into public science communication. The show discussed Pokemon-related topics and occasionally mentioned the player character's progress, creating the impression that Oak monitored their journey despite remaining in Kanto. This media presence elevated Oak's status from regional expert to international authority, whose opinions reached beyond academic circles into mainstream culture. The 3-year gap between Red and Blue and Gold and Silver allowed Oak to build this media career, a realistic progression that made the Pokemon world feel like it continued existing between games rather than freezing in stasis, waiting for players to return. The underground path connecting routes 5 and 6 in Kanto had established the concept of subterranean passages as shortcuts between routes. Gold and Silver expanded this idea through the underground in Goldenrod City, a shopping district where vendors sold rare items including evolution stones. The underground's layout created a maze that rewarded memorization, with multiple entrances and exits leading to different city sections. Players who navigated efficiently could save time compared to surface streets, while those who became lost found themselves wandering in circles among identical-looking corridors. Goldenrod City's department store offered the series' first multi-floor shopping experience, each level dedicated to different item categories. The rooftop featured vending machines selling fresh water, soda pop, and lemonade, drinks that healed Pokemon more efficiently than standard potions while costing less. Savvy players recognize these drinks as superior healing items during the midgame, purchasing them in bulk before challenging the Elite Four. The drinks could also be given to NPCs in Celadon City's Kanto, creating cross-regional quest chains that rewarded players who explored both halves of the game world thoroughly. The Game Corner returned in Goldenrod, with slot machines and card flip games that allowed players to earn coins redeemable for prizes, including rare Pokémon and TMs. Gambling mechanics in children's games would eventually face regulatory scrutiny, leading to censorship or removal in later releases and remakes. The original Gold and Silver featured fully functional slot machines, with animations showing reels spinning and stopping, creating the illusion of genuine gambling despite using fictional currency. Later versions replaced these mechanics with Voltorb Flip, a memory game that removed chance-based outcomes in favor of skill-based coin earning. The national park hosted bug-catching contests on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, competitions where trainers captured bug-type Pokémon for judging based on size and rarity. Winning the contest awarded a Sunstone, an evolution item required for Gloom's transformation into Blossom and Sunkern's evolution into Sunflora. This created one of the few guaranteed methods for obtaining Sunstones outside of finding them as hidden items in specific locations. The contest also offered opportunities to catch Scyther and Pinsir, version-exclusive Pokémon that appeared during competition windows, but rarely spawned in normal wild encounters. The day of the week mechanics extended beyond bug-catching contests into NPC schedules and item availability. Certain trainers only appeared for battles on specific days, creating a weekly rotation that encouraged players to check back regularly rather than exhausting all content in a single marathon session. The Goldenrod department store held sales on Mondays, offering evolution stones at reduced prices. These temporal restrictions created a sense that Johto operated according to rhythms independent of player actions, the region continuing its routines whether trainers participated or ignored them entirely. Whitney's Miltank in Goldenrod Gym achieved legendary status among players as one of the most challenging battles in the early game. The normal type cow Pokemon combined high HP, solid defenses, and the rollout move, which increased in power with each consecutive hit. Players whose teams consisted primarily of low-level normal and flying types found themselves at a severe disadvantage, unable to exploit type weaknesses while rollout gained momentum. Miltank's Attract move could infatuate male Pokemon on the player's team, reducing their chance to attack by 50% and compounding the difficulty. This combination created a skill check that forced players to develop deeper strategies than simple type advantage. The solutions to Whitney's Miltank varied depending on team composition and player creativity. Female Pokemon were immune to Attract, making Miltank easier for players who had trained gender-diverse teams. Rock-type moves dealt super effective damage to rollout, allowing Geodude users to tank hits while dealing respectable damage. Teaching Mud Slap to multiple team members reduced Miltank's accuracy, preventing rollout from building momentum. Players who struggled learned valuable lessons about team composition, status effects, and the importance of having answers to specific threats rather than relying solely on raw level advantages. Whitney's post-battle reaction also generated discussion, as she initially refused to award the plain badge after losing, instead crying and forcing players to speak with her again before she acknowledged defeat. This emotional response humanized gym leaders beyond their role as skill checks, suggesting that losing battles carried genuine emotional weight for these characters. Some players found Whitney's reaction endearing, while others perceived it as poor sportsmanship, creating diverse interpretations of a single scripted event. The ambiguity in how to read her character reflected sophisticated writing that allowed players to project their own values onto NPC behavior. The burned tower in Ecruteak City contained three sleeping legendary beasts that awakened when the player approached, immediately fleeing to roam Johto's routes randomly. Raikou, Entei, and Suicune scattered in different directions, becoming roaming encounters that appeared during wild Pokemon battles with extremely low probability. The roaming mechanics frustrated players who attempted to hunt these legendaries through normal gameplay, as each beast could appear on any route in Johto at any time, and encountering one required tremendous luck. The beasts also fled combat immediately, allowing only a single turn before escaping unless trapped by specific moves or abilities. If you're still awake halfway through, maybe subscribe before you drift off and tell me what time it is where you're watching from. The strategy for catching roaming legendaries involved using mean looks or block to prevent escape, then gradually reducing their HP while hoping they didn't flee on subsequent encounters. Each roaming Pokemon maintained the same HP across all encounters, meaning damage inflicted during one battle persisted into the next. This created multi-session hunting experiences, where players gradually weakened their target over dozens of encounters before finally having opportunity to throw Pokeballs. The roaming mechanic would return in later generations, with adjustments to make hunting less frustrating, but Gold and Silver's implementation remained deliberately challenging. Suicune received special treatment through a subplot where it appeared at various locations throughout the story, allowing players to observe it before the final confrontation. This narrative integration elevated Suicune above its fellow legendary beasts, positioning it as more important to Johto's mythology, despite sharing typing and base stat totals with Raikou and Entei. Crystal version would later expand Suicune's role significantly, making it the cover legendary and adding a quest line that culminated in a guaranteed encounter at the Tin Tower. This differential treatment created a hierarchy among the three beasts that continued throughout the franchise's history. The Tin Tower in Ecruteak City stood as one of Johto's most sacred locations, a 10-story structure where Ho-Oh would eventually appear to players who obtained the Rainbow Wing. Accessing the tower required defeating the Kimono Girls in their dance theater, then receiving the Rainbow Wing from the Radio Tower Director after stopping Team Rocket's takeover. This multi-step quest chain ensured that players couldn't encounter Ho-Oh until they had progressed substantially through the story, making the legendary bird feel like an earned reward rather than a random encounter. The tower's interior featured limited trainer battles, instead emphasizing environmental navigation through holes in floors and careful jumping across gaps. The Kimono Girls themselves represented traditional Japanese performance art, each named after one of Eevee's 5 evolutions, available in Gold and Silver. The girls used Vaporeon, Jolteon, Flareon, Espeon, and Umbreon in battle, showcasing the branching evolution paths possible from a single base Pokemon. Their coordinated appearance and matching outfits emphasized unity despite individual differences, a thematic parallel to how Eevee's various evolutions remained connected through shared ancestry. The decision to feature these performers as gatekeepers to the Tin Tower connected Johto's legendary Pokemon to cultural traditions, suggesting that Ho-Oh's mythology was preserved through ritual and performance across generations. The Whirl Islands housed Lugia in Silver version, requiring players to navigate underwater currents and multi-level cave systems before reaching the legendary Pokemon's resting place. The islands sat between Xianwood City and Olivine City, accessible only by surfing and navigating whirlpool currents, using the field move Whirlpool obtained from defeating Claire in Blackthorn Gym. This progression gate ensured players couldn't encounter Lugia until late game, after assembling a capable team and demonstrating mastery of HM mechanics. The Silver Wing item, obtained from the Radio Tower Director similarly to the Rainbow Wing, served as final permission to approach Lugia's chamber. The underwater sections within Whirl Islands utilized tide mechanics, where water levels changed based on time of day, opening or blocking different paths depending on when players explored. This temporal variation meant that thorough exploration required multiple visits at different times, creating opportunities to discover items and trainers that weren't accessible during initial trips. The tide system represented sophisticated environmental design for Game Boy Color hardware, demonstrating the developer's commitment to creating dynamic spaces that rewarded patience and observation. Olivine City's lighthouse provided Medicine Quest that introduced Jasmine's character and motivation. The lighthouse Pokemon, an Ampharos named Amphi, had fallen ill and required medicine from Cyanwood City's pharmacy. Jasmine refused to battle until players retrieved the secret potion and healed Amphi, creating a quest chain that forced exploration of Johto's western territories before challenging the sixth gym. This integration of narrative and progression gates distinguished Gold and Silver from Red and Blue's more straightforward gym progression, where leaders could be challenged in sequence without elaborate subquests. The decision to make Amphi an Ampharos, rather than a generic lighthouse Pokemon, emphasized the species' connection to illumination and electricity. Ampharos's Japanese name, Denryu, translates roughly to electric current, and its Pokédex entry describes its tail beacon being visible from far distances. The Lighthouse quest reinforced these characteristics through gameplay rather than mere description, showing rather than telling how Ampharos served human communities through its natural electrical generation. This environmental integration of Pokemon into human society created a more believable world than one where creatures existed solely for battle purposes. Jasmine's Steel-type specialization represented a significant milestone, as Gold and Silver introduced both Steel and Dark types to the Pokemon universe. Her team consisted of Magnemite, and Steelix, with the final Pokemon serving as her ace. Steelix's evolution from Onix through trading, while holding Metal Coat, demonstrated the new trade evolution items introduced in the second generation, creating evolution paths that couldn't be accessed through simple leveling. The requirement to trade while holding specific items added complexity to completing the Pokédex, necessitating either a second Game Boy and game cartridge or cooperation with friends. The journey to Cianwood City required surfing south from Olivine across open ocean routes, the first time players needed to travel such distances over water without intermediate towns. Route 40 and 41 stretched between the cities, populated by trainers on surfboards and swimmers treading water, creating the impression of a maritime culture distinct from Johto's mainland settlements. Tentacool and Tentacruel appeared frequently during these routes, their high encounter rates making repels valuable commodities for players who preferred to minimize random battles during long water journeys. Cianwood City's isolation on Johto's western edge made it feel frontier-like compared to the more developed eastern cities. The city housed only a gym, a pharmacy, and a few residences, lacking the department stores and entertainment facilities found in Goldenrod or Ecruteak. This sparse development created atmosphere suggesting that Cianwood served primarily as a destination for dedicated trainers seeking to challenge Chuck's fighting-type gym rather than a commercial hub. The city's layout emphasized natural beauty over urban planning, with cliffs surrounding settlement and ocean stretching beyond in all directions. Chuck's gym introduced the boulder-pushing puzzle that would recur throughout the series, requiring players to maneuver large rocks onto switches to open paths deeper into the facility. The puzzle's solution required planning several moves ahead, as rocks could only be pushed into specific positions and incorrect sequences created unsolvable states requiring reset. This cognitive challenge distinguished Chuck's gym from others that relied primarily on trainer battles or simple maze navigation. The fighting type trainers inside used Primeape, Machop, and Machoke, foreshadowing Chuck's team composition while providing experience for players training psychic or flying types that held advantage over fighting types. The Shuckle received as a gift from a Keenwood resident represented one of Gold and Silver's stranger Pokemon distributions. The Bug Rock type possessed extreme defensive stats while having almost no offensive capability, creating a creature that could survive nearly any attack but struggled to defeat opponents. Shuckle's unique defensive profile made it valuable in specific competitive strategies involving healing moves and stall tactics, but casual players often found it frustrating to use due to battles lasting dozens of turns. The gift came with the request that players care for Shuckle and return it eventually, though the game never enforced this agreement, allowing players to keep it permanently. The Fly HM obtained in Cianwood allowed players to instantly travel to previously visited cities, dramatically reducing backtracking time and opening Johto for more efficient exploration. This fast travel mechanic became essential for completing quests that required returning to eastern cities from western locations, saving potentially hours of walking or surfing time. The decision to gate Fly behind Chuck's gym and a gift from Cianwood's residents ensured players experienced at least one complete ocean crossing on foot before gaining access to convenience fast travel, preserving the intended pacing for Johto's western journey. The Red Gyarados encounter at the Lake of Rage provided one of Gold and Silver's most iconic moments, a forced, shiny Pokemon battle that introduced the concept of alternate colorations. The shiny mechanic had existed since Gold and Silver's launch, but occurred with such rarity that many players never encountered a shiny Pokemon during normal gameplay. The guaranteed Red Gyarados ensured that every player experienced at least one shiny encounter, demonstrating that these alternate colors existed while also advancing the plot regarding Team Rocket's radio wave experiments. Lance's involvement in investigating Team Rocket's Lake of Rage operations revealed that the Elite Four member took active interest in protecting Pokemon from exploitation. This characterization distinguished Lance from Red and Blue's Elite Four, who existed primarily as endgame challenges without substantial narrative roles. Lance's subplot built toward the Team Rocket takeover of Goldenrod's radio tower, creating a through line that connected seemingly unrelated events into a coherent conspiracy. The revelation that Team Rocket had persisted in the 3 years since Giovanni's defeat added weight to Gold and Silver's connection with Kanto, suggesting that criminal organizations didn't simply dissolve when their leaders departed. The Rocket hideout in Mahogany Town utilized trapdoor tiles that dropped players into lower levels, creating a navigation puzzle where falling through correct holes led toward the boss, while incorrect paths resulted in longer detours. This vertical dungeon design required memorization and spatial reasoning, rewarding players who mapped the facility mentally or on paper. The hideout's aesthetic matched the original Rocket hideout beneath Celadon's game corner, maintaining visual continuity with the first generation while introducing new puzzle mechanics specific to Gold and Silver's design philosophy. The radio card obtained after clearing the Rocket hideout upgraded the Pokégear to receive Kanto radio signals once players traveled between regions. This item seemed minor during Johto exploration, but became essential for accessing certain Kanto Pokémon that only appeared when specific radio shows played. Snorlax blocking Diglett's cave required the Pokemon Flute channel, forcing players to tune their radio to the correct frequency before the sleeping giant would wake and battle could commence. This integration of the Pokégear into Kanto gameplay created continuity between the two regions beyond simple map connection. Price's Ice-type gym in Mahogany Town featured sliding ice puzzles that required precise movement sequences to reach the gym leader's platform. The ice tiles moved players in straight lines until they collided with walls or stationary objects, creating a puzzle where the solution involved using obstacles to change direction. Multiple paths existed to reach Price, but most resulted in sliding past the goal or becoming stuck in corners requiring restart. The puzzle difficulty elevated Mahogany's gym above earlier ones that used simpler navigation challenges, reflecting increasing player skill as the journey approached its conclusion. The Dragon's Den behind Blackthorn Gym served as the final test before challenging Claire, requiring players to answer questions about their training philosophy and relationship with Pokemon. The quiz administered by the Shrine's master had no wrong answers, instead characterizing the player based on responses without affecting game progression. This narrative device provided rare opportunity for players to express their approach to Pokemon training through dialogue choices rather than battle decisions. The quiz's questions touched on whether power or friendship mattered more, how Pokemon should be treated, and what motivated the player's journey, themes central to the series' overall message. Claire's refusal to award the Rising Badge after losing her gym battle created controversy similar to Whitney's post-loss reaction, though Claire's stubbornness stemmed from pride rather than emotion. The Dragon-type master couldn't accept that a challenger had defeated her dragons, sending players to the Dragon's Den for the Elder's approval before grudgingly acknowledging loss. This characterization positioned Claire as arrogant and difficult, contrasting with other gym leaders who accepted defeat gracefully. Her relationship with Lance as his cousin added familial tension, suggesting that living in a famous relative's shadow contributed to her competitive intensity and difficulty accepting defeat. The journey to the Pokemon League required navigating Victory Road, a cave system connecting Route 22 with Indigo Plateau. The cave's layout utilized multiple floors, accessible through ladders and strength boulders, creating three-dimensional maze navigation that required memorizing which ladders led where. Wild Pokemon encounters in Victory Road featured fully evolved forms and high-level creatures, signaling that players were approaching endgame content. Trainers inside used diverse teams with strategic movesets, testing whether players had developed well-rounded parties capable of handling multiple threats. The Elite Four in Gold and Silver consisted of Will, Koga, Bruno, and Karen, representing Psychic, Poison, Fighting, and Dark types respectively. This lineup differed substantially from Red and Blue's Elite Four, with only Bruno returning from the original group. Koga's promotion from Fuchsia Gym Leader to Elite Four member demonstrated that skilled trainers could advance within the Pokemon League hierarchy, while his daughter Janine inherited his gym leader position. This generational transition reflected the 3-year time gap and showed that Kanto's leadership structure had evolved during the interim period. Karen's specialization in dark types made her unique among Gold and Silver's Elite Four, as dark types had only just been introduced with the second generation. Her team included Umbreon, Houndoom, and Murkrow, creatures that exemplified the new type's strategic options. Dark typing's immunity to psychic attacks created interesting dynamics against Will's team, demonstrating how the type system had expanded beyond the original 15 types. Karen's post-battle speech about loving Pokemon regardless of their strength reinforced themes about trainer relationships mattering more than pure power, a philosophy that resonated with Gold and Silver's emphasis on happiness evolution and breeding bonds. The champion battle occurred not against a stranger but against Lance, the Dragon-type master who had assisted players during the Lake of Rage investigation. This revelation recontextualized Lance's previous appearances, showing that his involvement in stopping Team Rocket stemmed from his position as champion and responsibility to protect the region. Lance's team featured 3 Dragonite with different movesets, demonstrating the versatility possible within single species when properly trained. His Aerodactyl and Gyarados provided coverage against Dragon-type counters, creating a balanced team that tested player versatility rather than simply exploiting type advantages. Defeating Lance and becoming champion triggered the ending sequence where Professor Oak appeared to congratulate the player, cementing his role as mentor despite the protagonist's training under Professor Elm. Oak's involvement reflected his continued influence over both Kanto and Johto's trainer communities, positioning him as the spiritual authority who validated a championship status. The ending credits rolled over images of the player's journey, recapping major locations and encounters before revealing the final surprise that distinguished Gold and Silver from all previous Pokemon games. The post-game revelation that players could travel to Kanto represented one of gaming's most celebrated secrets, doubling the game's content by including an entire second region. The magnet train connecting Goldenrod and Saffron cities provided fast travel between regions once players obtained the pass from Copycat's house. This mechanical connection emphasized that Johto and Kanto existed as neighbors, sharing infrastructure and culture rather than isolated regions separated by vast distances. The ability to visit familiar locations 3 years after Red's journey created powerful nostalgia while also demonstrating how places and people had changed during the interim. Kanto's gym leaders had reorganized in the 3 years since Red and Blue, with Janine replacing Koga in Fuchsia City, and Blue taking over Viridian Gym after Giovanni's disappearance. These changes showed that the world had continued evolving between games rather than remaining static. Brock and Misty remained in their positions, providing continuity for players who wanted familiar faces, while the leadership changes created new challenges for those expecting identical experiences to the first generation. The gym leaders' Pokemon teams had increased in level substantially, requiring players to train beyond the Elite Four's strength before challenging Kanto's badges. The Kanto region itself appeared smaller and less densely populated compared to its Red and Blue incarnation, with certain routes and locations either removed or consolidated to fit both regions onto a single Game Boy cartridge. The technical achievement of including 2 full regions, despite Game Boy Color's limited memory, required significant compression and optimization. Certain Kanto features like the Safari Zone and Cerulean Cave were removed to save space, while others remained intact but with reduced interior detail. This compression created a slightly hollow version of Kanto that served primarily as nostalgic recreation rather than standalone experience. The Blue Battle in Viridian Gym provided closure for players who had accompanied Red through the first generation, showing how the rival had matured from ambitious challenger to respected gym leader. Blue's team consisted of high-level Pokemon from various types, rather than specializing like other gym leaders, reflecting his well-rounded training philosophy. His dialogue acknowledged the player as a skilled trainer who had defeated the Johto Elite Four, creating mutual respect that contrasted with his earlier competitive arrogance. This character development demonstrated that the 3-year time skip allowed for meaningful personality growth. Mount Silver served as Gold and Silver's final challenge, a snow-covered mountain accessible only after obtaining all 16 gym badges from both Kanto and Johto. The mountain's interior featured the strongest wild Pokemon in the game, with creatures appearing at levels exceeding 70. No trainers populated the mountain's paths, creating an eerie atmosphere where only wild Pokemon and harsh weather existed. This isolation built tension toward the summit where the final battle awaited, a confrontation that would test everything players had learned across both regions. The battle against Red at Mount Silver's peak represented the ultimate challenge, facing the protagonist from Red and Blue who had spent 3 years training in isolation. Red's team consisted of level 80 Pokemon, including Pikachu, the starter from Yellow version that had become symbolic of the player's journey through Kanto. Red never spoke during the encounter, maintaining the silent protagonist tradition while creating an almost mythological aura around the character. The battle's difficulty exceeded even Lance's champion fight, requiring optimal strategy and team composition to succeed. Red's Pikachu specifically appeared at level 81, higher than any other Pokemon on his team, emphasizing its importance as his partner. This detail connected to Yellow version, where Pikachu accompanied the player throughout the adventure, creating narrative continuity between games. The battles setting atop Mount Silver during snowfall created cinematic atmosphere, memorable imagery that players recalled years later when discussing Gold and Silver's most impactful moments. Defeating Red triggered no special cutscene or dialogue, only the standard victory animation and return to the Pokemon Center, allowing players to process the accomplishment without excessive fanfare. The credits rolled again after defeating Red, this time with different music and imagery showing the player character's complete journey through both regions. This second ending acknowledged that players had experienced everything Gold and Silver offered, conquering all challenges and becoming the strongest trainer in two regions. The understated conclusion matched the game's overall tone, preferring quiet moments of reflection over bombastic celebration. This restraint in storytelling distinguished Johto from later generations that increasingly emphasized dramatic narrative climaxes. The Celebi event, distributed through special promotional events in Japan and later through glitch exploits, added the time travel mythology to Gold and Silver's universe. Celebi could be encountered in Ilex Forest after obtaining the GS Ball through Nintendo events, triggering a cutscene where the time travel Pokemon appeared surrounded by chronological distortions. This event remained inaccessible to most Western players during the original release period, creating regional disparity in what content could be experienced. The decision to lock Celebi behind promotional events rather than in game progression frustrated players who wanted to complete their Pokédex through normal gameplay. The breeding mechanics introduced through the daycare expansion allowed players to produce eggs by leaving compatible Pokemon together, discovering that species could inherit moves from parents that they couldn't normally learn. This egg move system created depth in competitive team building, rewarding players who researched breeding chains to obtain optimal movesets. Certain moves could only be learned through breeding, requiring multi-generational planning to produce offspring with desired characteristics. The complexity of breeding would expand dramatically in later generations, but Gold and Silver established the foundation that made competitive Pokemon more accessible to dedicated players. The Pokeris virus, introduced in Gold and Silver as an extremely rare random encounter effect, doubled experience gains for infected Pokemon and could spread to party members. The virus had no negative effects despite its presentation as an infection, instead providing purely beneficial stat growth enhancement. Its rarity exceeded even shiny Pokemon encounters, with most players never seeing Pokeris during normal gameplay. Those lucky enough to encounter it could preserve infected Pokemon in storage boxes where the virus remained active indefinitely, creating living repositories of enhanced training capability. The hold item system, introduced in Gold and Silver, allowed Pokemon to carry items that provided various effects during battle. Berries healed status conditions automatically, type boosting items increased move power by 20%, and choice items locked Pokemon into single moves while dramatically boosting stats. This mechanical layer added strategic depth to team building beyond simple species selection and move choice, rewarding players who understood item synergies and planned accordingly. The hold item system would expand in later generations to include hundreds of different items with increasingly complex effects. The special split that would occur in Generation 4 already had groundwork laid through Gold and Silver's introduction of held items affecting special attack and special defense separately. While the actual split wouldn't happen until Diamond and Pearl, certain moves and mechanics in Gold and Silver anticipated the need for distinguishing between special offense and defense. This forward-thinking design demonstrated the development team's awareness that the type system required further refinement to achieve optimal balance. The Steel type's introduction created new defensive options, and reshaped competitive battling by providing resistance to normal and psychic types that had dominated first generation metagame. Pokemon like Steelix and Skarmory offered defensive profiles impossible in red and blue, capable of tanking hits that would obliterate most other creatures. The Dark type similarly countered psychic dominance while creating interesting offensive dynamics through moves like Pursuit that punished switching. These type additions fixed fundamental imbalances from the original type chart without requiring retroactive changes to existing Pokemon. The friendship evolution mechanic encouraged players to actively care for Pokemon rather than treating them as interchangeable battle tools. Creatures like Golbat couldn't reach their full potential through leveling alone, requiring genuine investment of time and attention. This system manifested the series' core philosophy about bonds between trainers and Pokemon through gameplay mechanics, rather than just narrative, creating emergent stories about partnership and growth. Players who grinded levels without regarding happiness found themselves unable to complete certain evolution lines, learning through experience that power alone couldn't achieve all goals. The mystery gift feature allowed players to connect two Game Boys and exchange random items, creating social experiences around unpredictable rewards. This feature required both players to be in close physical proximity, encouraging face-to-face interaction rather than online anonymity. The randomized nature meant that exchanges could yield anything from common berries to rare evolutionary items, creating excitement and disappointment in equal measure. This social gambling mechanic would be refined in later generations, but Gold and Silver established the template for player to player item exchange outside formal trading. The time capsule in Pokemon Centers allowed trading between Gold Silver and Red Blue Yellow, creating backward compatibility that preserved investments players had made in their first generation teams. Pokemon could be sent back to Kanto games, though they lost any moves or attributes that didn't exist in the original titles. This technical achievement required careful programming to prevent crashes when incompatible data attempted to transfer between generations. The time capsule metaphor perfectly captured the mechanic's function, allowing creatures to travel between different eras of Pokemon history while maintaining internal consistency. The mobile adapter planned for Gold and Silver in Japan would have enabled online trading and battling over cellular networks, an ambitious concept for Game Boy Color hardware. Technical and logistical challenges prevented widespread adoption, but the attempt demonstrated Game Freak's forward-thinking approach to connectivity. The mobile features included unique areas accessible only through online connection, creating content tiers that rewarded players who adopted new technology. These plans would eventually manifest more successfully in later generations once wireless technology became more reliable and widespread. The Crystal Ball Fortune Teller in Goldenrod determined compatibility between trainer and Pokemon, offering personalized readings based on player ID numbers and Pokemon characteristics. These readings had no mechanical effect, but provided entertainment and personalization, creating moments where players felt the game acknowledged their unique journey. The fortune teller's dialogue changed based on time and date, encouraging multiple visits to see different readings. This commitment to small details that enhanced the atmosphere without affecting gameplay demonstrated the development team's dedication to creating a living world. The Haircut Brothers in Goldenrod Underground offered grooming services that increased Pokemon happiness, providing an alternative to walking and battling for raising friendship levels. Different brothers charged different prices and provided varying amounts of happiness increase, creating optimization puzzles for min-maxing players. The mechanic acknowledged that building relationships required more than just combat experience, suggesting that Pokemon appreciated aesthetic care and attention to their comfort. This world-building detail reinforced that Pokemon possessed preferences and feelings beyond battle enthusiasm. The move to leader in Blackthorn City allowed players to remove HM moves that were otherwise impossible to forget, providing essential quality of life functionality for managing team movesets. This single NPC prevented situations where Pokemon became permanently locked into suboptimal move combinations due to field move requirements. The move deleter's placement in one of the final cities, visited during normal progression, suggested that the developers expected players to need the service primarily during late game team optimization rather than mid journey adjustment. The move reminder in the same house could reteach moves that Pokemon had forgotten, either through overwriting with new moves or evolution. This service required payment in heart scales, items obtained primarily through rock smash or fishing, creating an economy around move relearning. The mechanic allowed players to experiment with different move sets without permanently losing access to valuable attacks, encouraging exploration of strategic options. The heart scale currency connected mechanically to the happiness system through thematic association with emotional bonds. The Pokemon Communication Center, planned for Japanese Crystal, would have enabled news updates about game events and distributions, creating ongoing content delivery after purchase. This live service approach anticipated modern gaming's focus on continuous engagement rather than single purchase experiences. Technical limitations and market conditions prevented full realization of these features, but their inclusion in planning documents showed awareness that player retention required more than static content. The decoration system, introduced in Gold and Silver, allowed players to customize their rooms with furniture and posters obtained through various means. Dolls representing different Pokemon could be won from Game Corner prizes or purchased from vendors, creating collectible decorations that served no mechanical purpose beyond aesthetic pleasure. The ability to arrange these items in specific patterns gave players creative control over their personal space, an unusual feature for Game Boy games that typically didn't acknowledge player housing. This customization anticipated future generations' secret bases and player homes that would offer even more elaborate decoration options. The placement of furniture followed grid systems that required spatial planning, as larger items occupied multiple squares, while smaller decorations fit into single spaces. Players who enjoyed interior design could spend hours arranging and rearranging their rooms, creating layouts that reflected personal taste. The game saved these arrangements, meaning that each time players entered their bedroom, they encountered their own creative decisions, made tangible through pixel art. This persistence of player choice in environmental design created attachment to spaces that might otherwise feel generic. Certain decorations could only be obtained through specific methods, creating collection challenges beyond simply purchasing everything from shops. The Tentacool doll required winning it from a Game Corner prize counter. The Clefairy doll needed purchase from the Goldenrod department store. The Pikachu doll came from a prize draw. This distribution across different game systems encouraged players to engage with various mechanics rather than focusing solely on battle progression. The decoration hunt provided alternative goals for players who wanted breaks from gym challenges. The placement mechanics allowed stacking certain decorations on tables or shelves, creating three-dimensional arrangements within the two-dimensional space. This illusion of depth emerged from careful sprite, layering that made items appear to rest on surfaces rather than floating in abstract grid positions. The technical implementation required tracking which furniture pieces could support decorations and which couldn't, creating invisible rules about what combinations were possible. Players discovered these rules through experimentation, learning through trial that some arrangements worked while others didn't. The color schemes of decorations varied widely, from pastel pinks and blues to vibrant reds and yellows. This variety allowed players to create themed rooms, focusing on specific color palettes or mixing contrasting hues for eclectic effects. The bedroom's default wallpaper and carpet could be changed through redemption items that completely transformed the space's base aesthetic. Different wallpapers depicted various patterns from stars to clouds to abstract designs, while carpets ranged from simple solid colors to complex geometric patterns. The ability to coordinate or deliberately clash these elements gave players substantial creative freedom. The dolls themselves represented carefully selected Pokemon that had become franchise icons through anime prominence or design memorability. Pikachu naturally appeared as the mascot species. Jigglypuff's anime role made it logical inclusion. Clefairy's original mascot consideration meant it deserved representation. Each doll was rendered in simplified form that captured essential characteristics while fitting Game Boy Color's graphical limitations. The doll's static poses created frozen moments that players could appreciate from multiple angles as they moved through their customized space. The poster collection featured images from Pokemon media, including movie promotions and game artwork. These posters couldn't be obtained through normal gameplay in all regions, some requiring attendance at real world Nintendo events or purchase of specific magazines. This connection between physical merchandise and in game items created cross media engagement that rewarded dedicated fans who participated in Pokemon culture beyond just playing games. The event exclusive decorations became status symbols among players who compared collections and traded information about how to obtain rare items. The decision to include room customization reflected growing awareness that players valued personalization beyond team building. While previous games allowed players to choose names and build custom Pokemon parties, Gold and Silver expanded personalization into environmental design. This philosophy would continue evolving through subsequent generations until it became expected feature rather than novel addition. The decoration system's presence in Gold and Silver demonstrated that Game Freak was thinking about player expression in increasingly sophisticated ways. The odd egg obtained from the daycare man in Route 34 could hatch into one of several baby Pokemon, including Pichu, Cleffa, Igglybuff, Tyrogue, Smoochum, Elekid, or Magby. This egg had unusually high chance of producing shiny Pokemon compared to normal eggs, making it valuable for players seeking alternate colorations. The randomized species meant that players couldn't control which baby Pokemon emerged, creating surprise and potential disappointment when the egg hatched. Multiple playthroughs could yield different results, encouraging experimentation across multiple save files. The baby Pokemon themselves represented backward compatibility challenges, as they were new species that evolved into first generation Pokemon. Pichu evolved into Pikachu through happiness. Cleffa became Clefairy the same way. Igglybuff transformed into Jigglypuff through friendship as well. These pre-evolutions couldn't be traded to Red, Blue, Yellow because those games had no data for the new species, creating situations where evolution was necessary before transferring creatures to first-generation cartridges. The baby Pokemon added depth to breeding mechanics by showing that not all eggs produced base form Pokemon unless specific conditions were met. Breeding Pikachu without Light Ball produced Pikachu eggs rather than Pichu eggs, a detail that confused players, expecting all breeding to produce the lowest evolution stage. This exception required holding Light Ball specifically to access Pichu, creating item dependency for certain breeding outcomes. Similar rules applied to other baby Pokemon, with Clefairy and Jigglypuff needing specific incense items to produce their baby forms. These complex breeding requirements added layers to Pokédex completion, as casual players might never discover these mechanics without external guides. The Pokemon Trainer House in Viridian City allowed battles against uploaded teams from other players' save files through Mystery Gift Connection. This feature created asynchronous multiplayer where players could battle others without both being present simultaneously. The battling trainers spoke dialogue recorded from the other players' recent in game messages, creating the illusion of personality behind uploaded teams. This primitive form of online competition anticipated future generations' more robust multiplayer features while working within Game Boy Color's technical constraints. The uploaded teams didn't include the actual player's name due to character encoding limitations, instead showing generic trainer sprites with preset dialogue. This anonymization prevented toxic behavior that might emerge from direct player interaction while still providing competition against human built teams. The random nature of which uploads appeared meant that players never knew whether they'd face challenging competitive teams or casual parties assembled by children. This unpredictability created varied experiences across multiple visits to the trainer house. The team upload process required mystery gift connection with another player who had visited the trainer house, creating circular dependency where both players needed to participate for the feature to function. This design choice encouraged community building and information sharing about the feature's existence, as many players never discovered the trainer house without hearing about it from friends or reading about it in guides. The obscurity of this feature meant that substantial content went unnoticed by casual players who completed the main story without exhausting every location. The Pewter City Museum received updated exhibits in gold and silver, displaying new fossils and ancient Pokemon information that reflected expanded lore from the second generation. The museum's second floor opened to players who achieved certain milestones, rewarding exploration with additional exhibits about legendary Pokemon and prehistoric creatures. The educational tone of exhibit descriptions provided world building details that deepened understanding of Pokemon biology and history without requiring players to read supplementary materials outside the games. The museum's curator discussed recent archaeological discoveries that tied into the ruins of Alph, creating narrative connections between Kanto and Johto's ancient history. These references suggested that both regions shared cultural heritage, extending back millennia before their modern political separation. The implications of shared prehistory raised questions about how regional boundaries formed and why Kanto and Johto developed distinct identities, despite geographic proximity. These subtle world building details rewarded attentive players who considered narrative implications beyond immediate plot. The museum's admission fee remained unchanged from Red and Blue, maintaining continuity across the 3-year time skip. This detail suggested that economic conditions had remained stable despite Team Rocket's continued operations and the political changes implied by Blue's gym leader ascension. The consistent pricing created a sense of normalcy that contrasted with the major narrative upheavals occurring in both regions. Small details like unchanging museum fees grounded the world in recognizable patterns that made extraordinary events feel more impactful. The Mount Moon Square appeared on Monday nights, a special area accessible only during specific timing windows. This hidden location contained Clefairy performing a dance around a mysterious stone, a reference to anime episodes featuring Mount Moon's mystical properties. Players who witnessed the dance could receive moonstones from the departing Clefairy, creating rare item acquisition that rewarded time-specific exploration. The scene's whimsical nature broke from Gold and Silver's generally grounded tone, creating magical moment that felt earned rather than arbitrary due to the specific requirements for witnessing it. The Clefairy dance incorporated lunar mythology that had been part of Pokemon lore since the first generation. Clefairy's association with the moon extended beyond its evolution method into behavioral patterns and habitat preferences. The Mount Moon Square made these connections explicit through visual representation rather than text description, showing rather than telling how Clefairy related to celestial bodies. This environmental storytelling created richer understanding of species ecology without requiring Pokédex entries to explain every detail. The square's temporal restriction to Monday nights created scarcity that made witnessing the event feel special. Players had to actively plan to visit Mount Moon during the correct time window, requiring either fortunate timing or deliberate scheduling. This design choice prioritized meaningful moments over constant availability, valuing quality of experience over quantity of content. The rarity of the event meant that many players never saw it during normal playthroughs, creating word of mouth mystique when those who had witnessed it shared stories with friends. The photo opportunities introduced through Cameron, the photographer in various locations, allowed players to take pictures with Pokemon in scenic environments. These photos had no mechanical function but provided collectible memories of the journey through Johto. The photographer appeared in different locations on different days, requiring exploration and timing to encounter him. The photos could be viewed later in the player's PC, creating a personal album documenting adventures. This feature anticipated social media's emphasis on capturing and sharing gaming moments, even though players couldn't actually share photos with others. The scenic locations chosen for photo opportunities showcased Johto's environmental diversity. Photos could be taken at the ruins of Alf with mysterious architecture in background. Mount Moon's unique square provided another option during Monday night visits. Each location offered a different aesthetic framing that changed how player and Pokemon appeared in the composition. The variety of backgrounds encouraged players to collect multiple photos rather than stopping after the first opportunity. The photographer's dialogue changed based on which Pokemon accompanied the player, commenting on species characteristics or expressing enthusiasm about rare creatures. This personalization created the impression that the NPC recognized different species rather than treating all Pokemon identically. The small touches of personality in these interactions made the photographer feel like a character rather than a function, contributing to the world's lived in quality. Players who paid attention to dialogue noticed how NPCs reacted differently to various Pokemon, rewarding observation with character depth. The berry system, introduced in Gold and Silver, allowed players to grow fruit through planting and watering mechanics. Certain berries restored HP, others cured status conditions, and some provided battle benefits when held. The growth cycle required real-time passage measured by the internal clock, meaning berries matured over hours or days rather than instantly. This agricultural mechanic encouraged patient resource management rather than immediate gratification, teaching players to plan ahead for future needs. The shuckleberry juice fermentation glitch created one of Gold and Silver's most bizarre exploits. If Shuckle held a berry for extended periods, the berry would transform into rare candy through a programming oversight. This unintended interaction between the hold item system and Shuckle's unique characteristics allowed infinite rare candy generation for players who discovered the technique. Game Freak never patched this glitch in the original releases, allowing it to become part of Gold and Silver's speedrunning and challenge run metagames. The berry planting locations were limited to specific plots in certain routes, creating scarcity that prevented players from cultivating unlimited resources. Each plot could only hold one berry plant at a time, and plants needed regular watering to reach maximum yield. The maintenance requirements meant that players who traveled extensively without returning to berry plots might find their plants withered, wasting the initial planting investment. This consequence for neglect reinforced that the game world continued operating even when players weren't actively engaging with it. The different berry types required learning which plots produced optimal yields for each variety. Some berries grew better in specific routes due to implied soil conditions or climate factors that were never explicitly stated. Players who experimented with planting different berries in various locations discovered these patterns through trial and error, building knowledge that couldn't be found in game tutorials. This emergent learning process rewarded experimentation and observation, skills that transferred to other game systems requiring similar discovery approaches. The apricorns found throughout Johto could be crafted into specialized Pokeballs by Kurt in Azalea Town. Each apricorn color produced different ball types with unique effects. Black apricorns became heavy balls, effective against large Pokemon. White apricorns crafted into fast balls that caught speedy species more easily. The variety of specialized balls created strategic considerations about which balls to use for specific encounters, adding depth to catching mechanics beyond the standard Pokeball Great Ball Ultra Ball progression. Kurt required a full day to craft each ball, creating time gates that prevented players from obtaining unlimited supplies immediately. This restriction encouraged thoughtful use of specialized balls rather than throwing them carelessly. Players learned to save heavy balls for legendary birds or fast balls for roaming beasts, treating these items as valuable resources rather than disposable tools. The scarcity created by crafting time made successfully catching target Pokemon feel more rewarding than if specialized balls were infinitely available. The apricorn collection process required checking specific trees in various locations, creating exploration incentives similar to berry planting. Trees replenished apricorns after time passage, allowing renewable resource gathering for players who returned regularly. The color variety meant that completionist players needed to remember which trees produced which colors, creating mental maps that deepened familiarity with Johto's geography. This geographic knowledge became second nature for dedicated players who could navigate between apricorn trees without consulting maps. The friend ball crafted from green apricorns caused caught Pokemon to start with maximum happiness, dramatically reducing time required for friendship evolutions. This specialized function made friend balls extremely valuable for players building teams around Crobat, Blissey, or other happiness evolution species. The decision to use a friend ball represented strategic sacrifice, since each green apricorn could only become one ball, and supplies were limited by tree respawn rates. The love ball crafted from pink apricorns had higher catch rates against Pokemon of the same species but opposite gender as the player's lead Pokemon. This highly specific condition made love balls situational at best, though they proved useful for breeding projects that required catching specific gender combinations. The obscure mechanics of various specialized balls meant that many players never fully understood how to optimize their use, treating them as curiosities rather than strategic tools. The lure ball crafted from blue apricorns excelled at catching Pokemon encountered while fishing, providing niche utility that saved Ultra Balls during fishing sessions. The level ball crafted from red apricorns grew more effective based on level difference between the player's Pokemon and the wild encounter, rewarding players who brought high-level Pokemon to catching sessions. Each specialized ball created unique optimization puzzles for players who enjoyed min-maxing capture success rates. The moon ball, crafted from yellow apricorns, was supposed to work effectively against Pokemon that evolved with moonstones, but a programming error made it function incorrectly, applying bonuses to Pokemon that evolved through burning instead. This glitch rendered moon balls largely useless, since very few Pokemon evolved through burning mechanics. The bug persisted through all original releases and only became widely known after data miners examined the game's code years later, revealing that an entire ball type had been broken since launch. The park ball received a national park during bug catching contests couldn't be used outside that specific event, creating temporary tools that forced players to catch valuable Pokemon within contest windows. This restriction added tension to bug catching contests, as players couldn't simply return later with better Pokeballs to catch Scyther or Pinsir. The park balls disappeared from inventory after the contest ended, preventing exploitation where players might save them for later use. This careful balancing of temporary power prevented the contest's special balls from trivializing normal catching mechanics. The fishing rod progression, from old rod to good rod to super rod, created a gear based advancement system separate from badge collection. Each rod unlocked access to different species and higher level encounters, incentivizing players to seek out the NPCs who distributed upgraded fishing equipment. The old rod provided only Magikarp in most locations, creating a false start that might discourage players from fishing until they obtained better rods. This gating structure forced players to actively seek upgrades rather than stumbling into them through normal progression. The Fishing Guru family distributed rods across both Johto and Kanto, requiring travel to multiple locations to obtain the complete set. This distribution pattern encouraged exploration and rewarded players who talked to NPCs in various towns. The good rod came from a fishing guru in Olivine City, while the super rod required visiting Kanto's Route 12. This cross regional distribution created another connection between Johto and Kanto, suggesting that fishing culture spanned both areas and that gurus maintained an informal network. The fishing mechanic itself required button timing to successfully hook Pokemon, creating a mini game within the catching process. Players who mashed buttons too quickly or too slowly would fail to hook anything, while proper timing resulted in encounters. This skill gate meant that fishing success depended partially on player reflexes rather than pure randomness. The timing windows were generous enough that most players could master them quickly, but strict enough that inattentive fishing sessions often yielded nothing. The variety of Pokemon catchable through fishing rivaled or exceeded species available through grass encounters in many locations. Water routes that seemed monotonous when surfing revealed diverse aquatic populations when fished. Tentacool dominated surfing encounters, but fishing could yield Corsola, Staryu, or Chincho depending on location and rod quality. This diversity rewarded players who invested time into fishing rather than dismissing it as an optional activity. The Pokeathlon would be introduced in Heart Gold and Soul Silver as a major addition, but Gold and Silver's bug catching contest served as a precursor to competitive minigames. The contest required balancing catching speed, species rarity, and size to achieve winning scores. Different strategies emerged based on whether players prioritized finding rare Pokemon like Scyther versus quickly catching common bugs and hoping for exceptional size rolls. This strategic diversity created multiple viable approaches rather than one dominant strategy. The prizes awarded for winning bug catching contests included Sunstones as first place rewards, making the contest an important part of completion strategies for players seeking Sunflora or Blossom. Second and third place prizes offered less valuable but still useful items, like Everstone or gold berries. The differentiated reward structure incentivized repeated participation until players achieved first place rather than settling for runner-up positions. The judging criteria considered both species rarity and individual size, creating two-dimensional optimization that couldn't be solved by simply catching the rarest Pokemon. A large Caterpie might outscore a small Scyther depending on size values, creating situations where players debated whether to keep searching or submit their current catch. This risk-reward calculation added tension to the 15-minute time limit as seconds ticked away and players wrestled with submission decisions. The contest's Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday schedule created recurring opportunities throughout the week, allowing players who missed one contest to try again within days. This regular schedule accommodated different play patterns rather than restricting the contest to a single weekly occurrence. Players who optimized their schedules could participate 3 times per week, dramatically increasing chances of obtaining sunstones or other prizes. The frequent availability prevented frustration that might emerge if the contest only occurred once weekly. The Master Ball's unique status as the only guaranteed catch continued in Gold and Silver, though its distribution changed from red and blue. Lance gifted the Master Ball after players helped stop Team Rocket's takeover at the radio tower, creating a narrative reward for major story milestone. The single Master Ball per playthrough created agonizing decisions about where to use it, particularly given the three roaming legendary beasts and the stationary legendary birds. Different players developed different philosophies about optimal Master Ball usage, with some saving it for perfect IV legendaries, while others used it immediately on the first difficult catch. The Master Ball's mechanics were sometimes misunderstood by young players who believed it had a catch rate of 100% but could still fail in extreme cases. This misconception spread through playground rumors and persisted despite being mechanically false. The Master Ball's code guaranteed capture regardless of target HP, status conditions, or species catch rate. Understanding this guaranteed success helped players make informed decisions about when to deploy this precious resource. The cloning glitch discovered in Gold and Silver allowed duplication of Pokémon and items through careful manipulation of the trade system. Players could initiate trades, turn off their game at precise moments, and create duplicates of whatever was being traded. This glitch broke game balance for players who exploited it, allowing infinite rare items, multiple legendary Pokémon, and perfect IV breeding stock without legitimate effort. Game Freak never patched this glitch in original releases, leaving it as an open exploit that players could choose to use or ignore based on personal ethics. The ethical debates around cloning glitches divided the Pokemon community into camps that considered it legitimate gameplay versus cheating. Some players argued that single-player games allowed any approach since it didn't affect others' experiences. Others maintained that glitch exploitation violated the spirits of collecting and training, cheapening accomplishments through artificial duplication. These discussions continue in retro gaming communities whenever players revisit Gold and Silver with modern perspectives on glitches and exploits. The introduction of held items created an entirely new category of game mechanics that had to be balanced against the existing battle system. The leftovers item, which restored 16th of maximum HPs each turn, fundamentally changed how defensive Pokemon functioned. Stall strategies became viable where they had been impossible in Red and Blue, extending battle durations and rewarding patience over aggression. The Scope Lens item increased critical hit rates, benefiting Pokemon with high critical hit move ratios. Each held item created new strategic possibilities that experienced players learned to exploit. The situational nature of many held items meant that optimal choices shifted based on opponent teams and battle format. Quick Claw allowed slower Pokemon to occasionally move first, creating unpredictable scenarios in normally speed-based matchups. Bright Powder reduced opponent accuracy, frustrating strategies that relied on guaranteed hits. The variety of available items meant that battle outcomes sometimes hinged on item choices rather than pure species matchups, adding depth that kept competitive play interesting across many matches. The Metal Coat item served dual purposes, as both a held item that boosted Steel-type moves and an evolution trigger for Onyx and Scyther when traded. This multifunctionality created decisions about whether to use Metal Coat for its immediate battle benefits or save it for evolution purposes. Players with access to multiple Metal Coats through game completion or trading faced easier decisions than those with single copies who had to prioritize. The scarcity of certain held items created mini economies in trading communities where players swapped items based on their evolving needs. The King's Rock similarly functioned as both a held item that added flinch chance to damaging moves and as an evolution trigger for Slowpoke and Poliwhirl when traded. The flinch mechanic it provided could devastate opponents by preventing actions across multiple turns, though the 20% proc rate meant it wasn't reliable enough to base entire strategies around. The item's dual nature reflected thoughtful design that maximized mechanical value from limited item slots in the code. The evolutionary stones retained their importance from red and blue while gaining new contexts through gold and silver's expanded evolution mechanics. The Sunstone specifically enabled evolutions that hadn't existed in the first generation, creating new end states for species like Gloom and Sunkern. The discovery of evolutionary stones in the wild required careful exploration, with items hidden on routes that players might pass through without thorough checking. This rewarded attentive players who spoke to NPCs, checked suspicious locations, and investigated environmental features that might hide items. The Pokemon League's redesigned Championship Challenge maintained the gauntlet structure of 5 consecutive battles, but introduced new personalities and team compositions. The Victory Road leading to Indigo Plateau tested whether players had assembled well-rounded teams capable of handling diverse threats. Trainers inside used fully evolved Pokemon with strategic movesets that punished one-dimensional teams. The Victory Road experience separated casual players from those who had invested in building properly constructed parties. The Elite Four's team compositions showed strategic depth that surpassed most in-game trainers. Will's psychic specialists exploited special attack advantages while using support moves to hinder opponents. Koga's poison types combined direct damage with status conditions that wore down opponents over multiple turns. Bruno's fighting types demonstrated physical power that overwhelmed defensively weak teams. Karen's dark types resisted psychic attacks while hitting hard against common team compositions. Each specialist required specific counter strategies rather than relying on brute force level advantages. The rematches available after becoming champion and returning to the Elite Four allowed players to test improved teams against the same challenge. The Elite Four's teams remained unchanged, creating benchmarks that showed how much stronger the player's party had become. These rematches offered guaranteed experience gains for training new Pokemon or leveling teams for the eventual Red Battle. The ability to repeat the Elite Four challenge unlimited times created endgame loops for players who wanted to maximize their teams before attempting Mount Silver. The level curve between defeating Lance and challenging Red created significant gaps that required substantial grinding or strategic planning. Red's lowest level Pokemon exceeded most Elite Four teams by 10 levels, demanding that players invest time into training rather than immediately rushing to Mount Silver after becoming champion. This level gate served as soft progression control that prevented underleveled teams from attempting the final battle prematurely. Players who tried Mount Silver immediately after the Elite Four typically failed and learned through experience that more preparation was necessary. The phone system's implementation created persistent connections with trainers throughout Johto who would call the player at random times. These calls ranged from rematch requests to item offers to simple conversations that built NPC personality. The unpredictable timing meant that players couldn't control when calls occurred, leading to interruptions during exploration or battles. This randomness made the phone system feel more realistic by simulating actual phone behavior where calls arrive unexpectedly. Some players found the interruptions annoying, while others appreciated the world-building detail. The trainer rematches, triggered through phone calls, provided renewable experience sources and opportunities to test teams against familiar opponents. Trainers who called for rematches typically had leveled up their teams since previous encounters, creating gradually scaling challenges. The phone roster grew as players progressed through the game and registered more trainers, creating expanding networks of potential rematches. Strategic players identified which trainers provided optimal experience gains and noted their locations for efficient grinding routes. The gift Pokemon distributed throughout Johto included species that couldn't be easily obtained through wild encounters. The Eevee gifted in Goldenrod represented a valuable addition, given its 5 potential evolution paths. The Spearow received in exchange for a Machop demonstrated NPC trading that provided species access without requiring version exclusivity trading with friends. Each gift Pokemon represented deliberate design decisions about what species should be readily available versus requiring hunting effort. The decision to make Tyrogue and its evolution family obtainable only through a single gift in Mount Mortar created completionist challenges. Players who knocked out Tyrogue or saved after obtaining one with undesirable stats faced either accepting suboptimal Pokemon or restarting their entire playthrough. This consequence for mistake or bad luck taught players to save before one-time encounters, a lesson that transferred to legendary Pokemon battles and other unique situations. The fossil restoration system, inherited from Red and Blue, returned in Gold and Silver with Kanto access to Cinnabar Island's laboratory. The fossils obtained from Pewter Museum's back room after becoming champion could be revived into Omanite, Kabuto, or Aerodactyl, allowing players to obtain these ancient Pokemon without trading. The 3-year time gap explained why fossil restoration remained available despite Cinnabar's volcanic eruption, suggesting that research had relocated or been rebuilt in the interim. The volcanic eruption that devastated Cinnabar between generations created a tangible demonstration of how the Pokemon world changed during the time skip. The destroyed laboratory and burned gym showed consequences of natural disasters that affected even important locations. Blue's mention of the eruption, when encountered in Viridian Gym, provided a narrative connection, explaining why the powerful trainer had relocated. This environmental storytelling through level design changes proved more effective than explicit exposition about what happened during the 3 missing years. The Kanto Gym Badge quest provided endgame challenges for players who had exhausted Johto's content. The significantly higher level caps on Kanto's gym leaders compared to their red and blue iterations reflected the time skip and provided appropriate difficulty for post-champion teams. Brock's level 50 plus Pokemon demonstrated that he had continued training during the intervening years, maintaining his position as a formidable gym leader rather than stagnating at his original power level. The badge collection across both regions created 16 total badges to earn, doubling the usual progression structure. This extended goal gave completionist players clear objectives beyond Pokédex completion or Battle Tower challenges. The sense of accomplishment from collecting all 16 badges rewarded dedication and skill, particularly given the difficulty spike in Kanto's gym leaders. Players who achieved this milestone gained access to Mount Silver as their reward, creating clear progression toward the ultimate challenge. The cut content and unused data within Gold and Silver's code revealed abandoned features and alternative designs. Data miners discovered unused Pokemon sprites, items that never appeared in the final game, and map sections that were created but left inaccessible. This cut content provided glimpses into development decisions and changes made during the production process. Understanding what was removed helped fans appreciate both the final product and the alternatives that might have been. The programming limitations of Game Boy Color hardware constrained what could be included in Gold and Silver despite the developers' ambitions. The decision to include 2 regions required significant compression and optimization that impressed technical analysts. The fact that both Johto and Kanto fit onto a single cartridge with room for new Pokemon, time systems, and breeding mechanics demonstrated exceptional programming efficiency. Later developers studied Gold and Silver's code to understand the compression techniques that made such dense content possible on limited hardware. The color palettes available on Game Boy Color allowed for more visually distinct environments than original Game Boy's grayscale presentation. Different routes and cities received unique color schemes that created atmosphere and visual identity. The day and night cycles implementation through palette swaps demonstrated creative use of hardware limitations to achieve desired effects. Nighttime maps used darker colors that maintained readability while creating ambiance distinct from daytime exploration. The sprite animations in battle remained relatively simple compared to later generations, but they represented meaningful improvement over Red and Blue's static images. Pokemon moved slightly when attacking or taking damage, creating the impression of dynamic action within turn based combat. These subtle animations required additional sprite variants that consumed precious cartridge memory, demonstrating the developer's commitment to improving presentation even when working within tight constraints. The music composition for Gold and Silver built upon Red and Blue's foundation while expanding the soundtrack with new themes. The opening theme's contemplative melody contrasted sharply with the energetic introduction from the first generation. Route themes varied more dramatically than in previous games, with some focusing on calm exploration while others emphasized tension or wonder. The battle themes distinguished between wild encounters, trainer battles, and gym leader fights through musical intensity and tempo. The Tin Tower and Bell Tower themes incorporated traditional Japanese instruments and scales that created distinct sonic identities for these culturally significant locations. The decision to reference traditional music in these specific contexts reinforced the tower's roles as sacred spaces within Johto's cultural landscape. Players who recognized the musical references appreciated the attention to thematic detail, while those unfamiliar with the source material still experienced the emotional impact of the compositions. The Ecrutake City theme became one of Gold and Silver's most beloved musical pieces, capturing the city's historical significance through its composition. The melody moved slowly through traditional scales, evoking ancient architecture and cultural continuity that defined Ecrutake's character. The theme's prominence in fan arrangements and concert performances demonstrated its lasting impact on players who associated it with specific moments in their journey. The music transcended its original context to become emblematic of Johto itself. The National Park theme emphasized natural beauty and peaceful exploration, creating auditory respite from battle-focused locations. The gentle melody encouraged players to slow down and appreciate environmental design rather than rushing through toward the next objective. This musical pacing aligned with the bug-catching contest's leisurely structure, where success required patience and observation rather than combat prowess. The theme's calming effect made the national park a favorite location for players seeking breaks from intense gym battles or dungeon navigation. The surf theme replaced Red and Blue's simple water route music with a more elaborate composition that made extended ocean travel less monotonous. The melody incorporated wave, like rising and falling patterns that sonically represented the motion of riding Pokémon across water. This attention to thematic coherence between gameplay mechanics and musical representation demonstrated sophisticated design thinking that elevated the experience beyond functional level design. The Pokemon Center theme received subtle updates that maintained its recognizable melody while adding harmonic complexity. The new arrangement felt warmer and more welcoming than the first generation's version, reflecting technological improvements in sound hardware. The decision to keep the core melody intact preserved continuity across generations, while the enhanced arrangement showed musical evolution. Players who had memorized the original version unconsciously noticed the improvements without experiencing jarring discontinuity. The Team Rocket battle theme returned with new instrumentation that made it feel more menacing than its red and blue incarnation. The faster tempo and sharper sound design created urgency during rocket encounters, distinguishing them from standard trainer battles. This musical characterization reinforced Team Rocket's role as antagonists who posed genuine threat rather than comic relief. The theme's intensity prepared players for challenging battles against rocket executives whose teams exceeded normal trainer difficulty. The legendary Pokemon encounter themes for Ho-Oh and Lugia incorporated orchestral elements that pushed Game Boy Color's sound capabilities to their limits. These compositions built tension through rising chord progressions before resolving into triumphant melodies when battles commenced. The musical fanfare surrounding legendary encounters made them feel momentous, elevating these battles above routine wild Pokemon fights. Players who prepared extensively for legendary captures experienced additional satisfaction when the encounter music validated their anticipation. The rival battle theme evolved across multiple versions that played during different encounters, reflecting character development through musical progression. Early rival battles featured aggressive themes with harsh tones that matched his antagonistic personality. Later encounters introduced mellower elements that suggested growing maturity and changing perspective. The final rival theme incorporated both aggressive and contemplative sections, representing the character's complex journey from anger toward understanding. This musical character development paralleled the narrative arc without requiring explicit dialogue. The lighthouse theme in Olivan City created atmosphere of isolation and melancholy that reinforced the questline's emotional stakes. The slow tempo and minor key conveyed Jasmine's worry about her sick Ampharos, while also suggesting the lighthouse's function as solitary beacon. Players who listened carefully to the music understood the emotional tone before engaging with NPCs, demonstrating how soundtrack contributed to environmental storytelling. The theme's somber quality made healing Amphi feel more meaningful by establishing emotional investment through audio design. The radio tower theme during the rocket takeover shifted from its normal cheerful broadcasting music to a tense arrangement that communicated danger. This musical transformation occurred automatically when players entered the tower during the crisis, using audio cues to signal that circumstances had changed dramatically. The urgent rhythm and dissonant harmonies created stress that enhanced the narrative stakes without requiring cutscenes or extensive dialogue. Players felt the tension orally before encountering a single rocket grunt. The Mount Silver theme represented the culmination of Gold and Silver's musical journey, a composition that embodied challenge and isolation simultaneously. The wind sound effects layered beneath the melody created an impression of harsh weather conditions, while the sparse instrumentation suggested the mountain's emptiness. This atmospheric approach to music design made Mount Silver feel like a genuinely forbidding place rather than just another dungeon. The theme prepared players mentally for the difficulty awaiting them at the peak. The red battle theme stood apart from all other battle music in Gold and Silver, incorporating elements from the champion battle theme while adding new sections that represented Red's legendary status. The composition built intensity gradually, starting with recognizable motifs before expanding into original territory that suggested this battle exceeded all previous challenges. Players who had defeated Lance might have felt confident until the music signaled that Red represented an entirely different tier of difficulty. The theme's complexity matched the mechanical challenge, creating audiovisual unity. The ending credits theme reprised major musical motifs from throughout the game, creating a medley that reminded players of their journey's highlights. The arrangement moved between town themes, route melodies, and battle music in ways that felt like musical storytelling, narrating the adventure through pure sound. Players who listened to the complete credits experienced emotional resonance as familiar themes triggered memories of specific locations or encounters. This musical retrospective provided satisfying closure to the 100-plus hour journey. The sound design for Pokémon Cries received updates that made many species sound more distinct than their red and blue versions. The hardware improvements allowed for more complex sound waves and better differentiation between similar species. Chikorita's cry sounded gentler than Bulbasaur's, despite both being grass starters. Cyndaquil's cry had sharper elements that suggested its fire typing. Totodile's cry incorporated water-like qualities through specific sound frequencies. These subtle distinctions helped players identify Pokémon orally, even before visual confirmation. The day and night cycle affected more than just visual presentation, it also influenced sound design in subtle ways. Nighttime routes featured different ambient sounds compared to daytime, with nocturnal Pokémon cries replacing diurnal species. The wind sound effects intensified during night hours, creating atmosphere of solitude and potential danger. These audio changes rewarded players who explored during different times, offering varied experiences that justified the internal clock system's implementation. The telephone ring sound became one of Gold and Silver's most memorable audio effects, instantly recognizable to players who had received dozens of calls from registered trainers. The sound's specific pitch and rhythm made it distinctive enough to interrupt concentration without being harsh or annoying. This careful audio design balanced functionality with user experience, creating notification sounds that served their purpose without creating player frustration. The phone ring became so iconic that later generations referenced it in nostalgic callbacks. The radio tower's various programs each had unique jingles and musical themes that played when tuning to specific stations. The Pokemon March had an upbeat marching rhythm that matched its function of increasing encounter rates. The Pokemon Lullaby featured soothing tones appropriate for decreasing wild battles. The Professor Oak Show had a dignified theme that suggested educational broadcasting. These distinct musical identities made station browsing more engaging than simply reading text descriptions. The slot machine sound effects in Goldenrod's Game Corner created audio feedback for every spin, stop, and payout. The mechanical sounds of reels spinning and clicking into place mimicked real slot machines, enhancing the gambling simulation. The victory jingles that played during winning combinations used ascending tones that triggered dopamine responses, basic game design that encouraged continued play. These audio elements made the game corner feel like an actual casino, despite being rendered in simple pixels and limited sound channels. The item finder device produced distinct beeping patterns when hidden items were nearby, with faster beeps indicating closer proximity. This audio treasure hunting mechanic allowed players to locate invisible items without pixel-perfect position checking. The satisfaction of hearing beeps accelerate into a continuous tone when standing on hidden item locations created small moments of discovery throughout Johto. Players who used the item finder thoroughly found dozens of hidden items that casual players missed entirely. The bicycle bell sound when riding through towns added whimsical audio detail that acknowledged the player's faster movement speed. This unnecessary flourish demonstrated attention to experiential details beyond core mechanics. The bell sound varied slightly between pressing the A button normally and holding it, creating responsive audio that reacted to player input. These micro-interactions accumulated into overall experience quality that distinguished polished games from merely functional ones. The sound of footsteps changed between different terrain types, with grass rustling differently than sand or tile floors. This environmental audio created subtle sense of place that reinforced visual cues about location types. Players unconsciously absorbed these audio distinctions, developing expectations about which sounds accompanied which environments. The consistency of audio environmental storytelling made rare exceptions more noticeable, such as the echo effects in caves or the muffled sounds underwater. The doorway transition sound that played when entering buildings became so familiar through repetition that it functioned as Pavlovian conditioning for safety. The sound signaled that players were leaving potentially dangerous routes to enter secure indoor spaces. This audio association created comfort responses that made towns and cities feel welcoming compared to wilderness areas. The sound design psychology employed here demonstrated sophisticated understanding of how audio shapes player emotional experience. The healing sound at Pokemon centers represented one of gaming's most satisfying audio effects, a ascending jingle that communicated restoration and renewal. The sound's positive associations made it a frequent subject of nostalgia and cultural reference among Pokemon fans. The specific notes and rhythm became inseparable from the concept of healing in Pokemon contexts. Later generations maintained similar healing sounds to preserve this audio continuity, recognizing that changing it would feel wrong to longtime players. The evolution theme music created anticipation and excitement during transformation sequences, building tension as Pokemon glowed and changed shape. The theme's specific structure, with its opening notes triggering immediate recognition, marked it as one of franchise's most iconic musical moments. Players who had evolved dozens of Pokemon still experienced emotional response hearing the theme, demonstrating how effectively the composition captured the significance of evolution. The music transformed mechanical process into narrative moment worthy of attention. The unowned symbols appeared in 28 different forms across Gold and Silver's ruins of Alph, with each letter shape requiring separate sprite work and collision detection. The alphabet coverage included all standard English letters, plus question mark and exclamation point forms, creating a complete communication system through Pokemon shapes. This design choice and elevated Unown from mere collectibles to actual writing system that ancient civilizations might have used. The dedication to creating 28 variants for a single species demonstrated commitment to world-building details. The sliding puzzles in the ruins of Alph required spatial reasoning and planning to solve, with different chambers featuring different puzzle difficulties. The puzzles depicted images of legendary Pokemon from previous and current generations, creating visual connections between ancient past and present-day creatures. Successfully completing puzzles opened sealed chambers where specific unknown forms appeared, rewarding puzzle solving with new collectibles. This integration of minigames into catching mechanics added variety to standard wild encounter grinding. The messages spelled by collecting unknown forms provided cryptic lore about the ruins' purpose and the relationship between humans and Pokemon in ancient times. These messages required catching specific letter combinations to read, creating long-term collection goals beyond simply completing the Pokédex. The intentionally vague wording left room for interpretation and speculation, with players developing theories about what the ancient civilization had tried to communicate. This mystery approach to lore engaged imagination in ways that explicit exposition couldn't match. The research notes found in the ruins of Alph mentioned scientists studying unknown behavior and attempting to decode their significance. These documents provided contemporary context, suggesting that Johto's academic community actively investigated ancient history rather than ignoring it. The implication that modern scholars couldn't fully understand the ruins despite advanced technology reinforced themes about lost knowledge and civilizational decline. This humbling acknowledgement that not everything could be scientifically explained added depth to world building. The radio tower's architecture dominated Goldenrod's skyline, visible from multiple routes and city sections. This landmark design helped players navigate the large city by providing a constant reference point. The tower's central location in Johto's largest urban center emphasized its importance to regional communications infrastructure. The decision to make the tower accessible and explorable rather than just decorative background demonstrated commitment to interactive environments. The radio tower takeover by Team Rocket created one of Gold and Silver's most extensive quest lines, requiring players to infiltrate the building, defeat multiple executives, and ultimately confront the organization's acting leadership. The multi-floor dungeon layout with rocket grunts on every level created sustained challenge rather than single boss encounter. This extended sequence provided narrative payoff for the various Team Rocket subplot threads that had appeared throughout the journey. The radio tower director's gratitude after rescue resulted in receiving the Rainbow Wing, or Silver Wing, items necessary for encountering Ho, O, or Lugia, respectively. This reward structure tied main questline completion to legendary Pokemon access, ensuring players engaged with the story before accessing endgame content. The significance of these items wasn't immediately apparent, requiring players to explore further or consult guides to understand how to proceed. This layered discovery process extended engagement beyond single quest completion. The fake director imposter created moment of narrative trickiness where players had to identify which NPC was genuine. This identity puzzle required attention to dialogue clues and behavioral differences rather than relying purely on combat to resolve conflicts. The imposter's presence demonstrated that Team Rocket employed more sophisticated tactics than simple violent confrontation. This elevated portrayal of the criminal organization made them feel more competent and threatening than their red and blue iteration. The Goldenrod Tunnel's underground merchants sold items unavailable in standard Pokemarts, creating alternative shopping district for specialty goods. The vendor's presence underground suggested informal economy operating outside official commercial regulations. This detail added texture to Goldenrod's characterization as a thriving metropolis with multiple economic layers. The tunnel's confusing layout made finding specific vendors challenging, rewarding players who memorized the underground network. The name raider in Goldenrod allowed players to rename their Pokémon, providing flexibility for correcting regretted nicknames or adapting naming schemes as teams evolved. This service existed as pure quality of life feature without mechanical benefit, demonstrating design philosophy that prioritized player satisfaction. The Name Raiders' dialogue commentary on proposed new names added personality to what could have been simple menu interface. His enthusiastic or skeptical reactions created sense that naming mattered aesthetically beyond functional identification. The Move Deleter's essential service, enabling removal of HM moves, prevented teams from being permanently locked into suboptimal configurations. This feature acknowledged that HM system created tension between exploration utility and battle effectiveness. The Move Deleter's existence represented developer recognition that mandatory field moves could create frustration without safety valve. The placement of this NPC in late-game city suggested that developers expected players to need the service primarily during endgame optimization. The daycare couple's relationship to breeding mechanics remained deliberately mysterious in Gold and Silver's text, with the old man claiming he didn't know how eggs appeared. This coy avoidance of explicit breeding discussion maintained family-friendly tone while implementing mechanical systems that required sexual reproduction to function. The vague explanations allowed younger players to accept eggs as magical phenomenon, while older players understood the biological implications. This dual-layer communication demonstrated sophisticated approach to age-appropriate content. The daycare level-up service automatically gained experience for deposited Pokémon based on steps taken while they remained stored. This passive training mechanic allowed players to level multiple Pokémon simultaneously without active grinding. The cost for withdrawing Pokémon scaled with levels gained, creating economic decision about whether passive training justified the expense. Strategic players used daycare to evolve Pokémon, requiring specific levels while simultaneously hatching eggs, maximizing efficiency. The daycare's location on Route 34 placed it centrally within Johto's geography, making it accessible from both eastern and western routes. This convenient positioning encouraged regular visits to check on deposited Pokémon or collect eggs. The nearby grass patches provided wild Pokemon encounters for players waiting for eggs to generate. This clustering of breeding related features demonstrated thoughtful level design that grouped mechanically related elements geographically. The Pokemon compatibility system for breeding introduced complex rules about which species could produce eggs together. Pokemon needed to share egg groups and be opposite genders generally, with Ditto serving as universal breeding partner that could match with almost any species. These compatibility restrictions created puzzles where obtaining certain egg moves required breeding chains across multiple generations. The complexity rewarded players who researched breeding mechanics while remaining accessible enough that casual experimentation yielded results. The inheritance of DVs, Gold and Silver's equivalent to later generations' IVs, from parent Pokemon to offspring, allowed selective breeding toward perfect stats. This genetic inheritance system created proto-competitive breeding where dedicated players could optimize their teams through multi-generational planning. The random nature of DV inheritance meant that producing ideal offspring required patience and luck, creating long-term engagement for players pursuing perfect specimens. This breeding depth added hundreds of hours of potential gameplay for those who engaged with it. The gender ratios of different Pokemon species influenced breeding difficulty, with species like starters having 87.5% male populations. This skewed ratio made obtaining female starters significantly harder than males, creating scarcity for players wanting to breed their starter Pokemon. The gender imbalance added challenge to completing certain breeding projects, while also creating trading value for female specimens of rare species. These biological details added strategic consideration to catching and training decisions. The baby Pokemon, obtainable only through breeding with specific held items, created additional collection challenges beyond standard Pokédex completion. Pichu required breeding Pikachu or Raichu without Light Ball. Cleffa needed breeding Clefairy or Clefable with no held item. Igglybuff came from breeding Jigglypuff or Wigglytuff similarly. These pre-evolution species couldn't be encountered in wild, making breeding the only acquisition method. This exclusive access through breeding encouraged engagement with the system. The Pokemon contests' absence in Gold and Silver, compared to their prominence in later generations, meant that the games focused purely on battling and collecting rather than alternative competition formats. This singular focus allowed greater depth in battle mechanics and exploration systems without diluting development resources across multiple game modes. The decision to concentrate on core gameplay elements rather than adding minigame variety reflected design philosophy prioritizing depth over breadth. The absence of abilities in Gold and Silver's battle system made species differentiation depend entirely on stats, typing, and move pool. This simpler system created clear strategic calculations where type matchups and move selection determined outcomes more directly than they would in later generations. The lack of abilities meant that Pokemon with identical stats and types played nearly identically, reducing strategic variety compared to future games. This limitation would be addressed in Ruby and Sapphire's introduction of abilities that added uniqueness to every species. The special stat remained unsplit in Gold and Silver, with single special value determining both offensive and defensive special capabilities. This meant that Pokemon with high special attack automatically had high special defense, and vice versa. The combined stat created situations where certain species, like Alakazam, dominated special combat, both offensively and defensively, despite thematic disconnect. The eventual special split in Generation 4 would address this mechanical quirk. The critical hit mechanics in Gold and Silver differed from Red and Blue's speed-based system, instead using flat probabilities that treated all Pokemon equally. This change removed advantage that speedy Pokemon had in the first generation, where critical hits occurred far more frequently for high-speed species. The normalized critical hit rate created more balanced competitive environment where luck affected all teams equally. Certain moves, like Slash, still had elevated critical hit ratios, but these were exceptions rather than speed-dependent calculations. The burn and poison status effects functioned differently than they would in later generations, with burn having attack stat rather than causing damage over time. This distinction made burn incredibly powerful for neutering physical attackers, but useless against special focused opponents. The asymmetry in status effect utility created strategic considerations about which status to inflict based on opponent team composition. Players who understood these mechanical nuances gained advantages over those who treated all status effects as equally valuable. The sleep mechanics in Gold and Silver remained brutally effective, with sleeping Pokémon unable to act for 1 to 7 turns randomly. This long duration, combined with no ability to wake up through damage, created situations where sleep effectively removed Pokémon from battle. The lack of sleep clause in standard gameplay allowed players to sleep entire enemy teams if they brought multiple sleep-inducing moves. This overpowered status effect would receive balancing adjustments in future generations. The freeze status existed as permanent condition that only thawed when hit by fire-type moves, making it potentially more debilitating than fainting. The permanent nature of freeze without self-thaw created situations where frozen Pokémon remained useless for entire battles unless specifically countered. This mechanical quirk made Ice-type moves with freeze chances extremely valuable despite their low probability. The frustration of permanent freeze contributed to mechanical changes in later generations. The confusion mechanics causing self-damage on 50% of turns, while confused created frustrating situations where Pokémon knocked themselves out through bad luck. The self-damage scaled with the confused Pokémon's attack stat, meaning physical attackers hurt themselves more severely than special attackers. This created weird incentive against raising attack stats for mixed teams that might face confusion. The punishing nature of confusion made it one of the most annoying status conditions, despite being technically less severe than sleep or freeze. The held item Bitter Berry in Gold and Silver cured confusion automatically, providing counterplay to what was otherwise random frustration. This single-use item needed to be held preemptively, creating trade-off between confusion insurance and other held item benefits. The scarcity of bitter berries through berry growing meant that players couldn't equip entire teams with confusion protection. This resource limitation forced decisions about which Pokémon most needed protection from confusion. The mint berry cured sleep status automatically when held, providing similar insurance against sleep's overpowered effects. The berry's consumption after single use meant that it couldn't protect against repeated sleep attempts in long battles. The decision to use item slot for sleep protection versus offensive held items created team-building trade-offs. Competitive players sometimes used mint berries on sweeper Pokémon to ensure one free wake-up if caught by sleep moves. The berry growth system's reliance on real-time passage created situations where players who didn't play daily found their berry plots withered and empty. This time pressure encouraged consistent engagement, but also punished players who took breaks from the game. The lost resources from withered berries felt wasteful, potentially frustrating players who forgot to check their plots regularly. This aggressive time gating represented controversial design choice that prioritized retention over player convenience. The phone call system's random timing meant that important calls about rare Pokémon swarms could arrive when players weren't actively playing, wasting opportunities. The lack of call history or voicemail meant that missed calls disappeared forever, potentially losing valuable information. This real-time communication system created fear of missing out that encouraged constant checking. The anxiety induced by potential missed calls demonstrated how time mechanics could create negative psychological pressures. The weekly Lapras distribution in Union Cave on Fridays created predictable rare Pokemon encounter that rewarded players who checked the location regularly. This schedule-based event gave players something to look forward to each week, while also ensuring that Lapras remained special rather than common. The limited availability transformed Lapras from a random encounter into a weekly appointment that structured play schedules. This design created habitual engagement patterns that modern games would expand into daily login rewards. The Pokemon Swarm system, triggered through phone calls, announced mass appearances of specific species on certain routes. These swarms made normally rare Pokemon temporarily common, allowing players to catch species they might have missed during normal exploration. The random timing and temporary duration created urgency when swarm calls arrived, encouraging players to drop current activities and rush to swarm locations. This dynamic encounter system added variety to wild Pokemon availability without requiring permanent map changes. The swarm species selection included Pokemon that were otherwise extremely rare or exclusive to limited locations, making swarms essential for some players' Pokédex completion. Yanma swarms on Route 35 provided opportunity to catch a species that rarely appeared otherwise. The system taught players to maintain large phone registries and check regularly for swarm notifications. This metagame knowledge separated casual players from dedicated completionists who understood all available mechanics. The Pokéseer in Xianwood City offered personality readings for Pokemon based on their hidden stats and characteristics. These readings had no mechanical effect, but provided characterization that helped players develop emotional attachments to their teams. The dialogue varied enough that players could visit multiple times with different Pokemon to receive distinct readings. This flavor content demonstrated commitment to immersive world building that extended beyond functional game systems. The Haircut Brothers' varying success rates meant that some visits resulted in large happiness increases, while others provided minimal gains. This randomness within service that cost money created gambling dynamic, where players hoped for favorable outcomes. The brothers' different prices and success rates created risk-reward calculations about whether expensive haircuts justified their higher success rates. This economic simulation added depth to the seemingly simple happiness system. The Goldenrod department store's bargain sale on Mondays offered evolution stones at reduced prices, creating weekly shopping opportunities for budget-conscious players. This scheduled discount encouraged checking back regularly rather than purchasing everything immediately. The sale prices made evolution stones accessible to players who might otherwise struggle to afford them at full cost. This economic accessibility ensured that evolution mechanics remained available to all players rather than only those who had accumulated substantial wealth. The rooftop vending machines, selling drinks at superior healing value to cost ratio compared to standard potions, created obvious optimization for informed players. Freshwater healed 50 HP for 200 Pokédollars, while similar healing from potions cost 300. This pricing disparity rewarded players who discovered the vending machines and recognized their value. The efficiency of drink-based healing made them staples of prepared teams heading into Elite Four challenges. The drink's secondary use as trade items for TMs in Celadon City connected Johto's economy to Kanto's through cross-regional commerce. The TMs obtained through drink trading included useful moves that weren't easily accessible otherwise. This trading system created purpose for purchasing multiple drinks beyond immediate healing needs. The economic interconnection between regions reinforced that Johto and Kanto existed within a unified commercial network. The prize exchange system in Goldenrod's Game Corner allowed redemption of coins for Pokemon and TMs unavailable through normal gameplay. The TM prizes included powerful moves like Thunderbolt and Ice Beam that could significantly strengthen teams. The Pokemon prizes featured species like Dratini that were difficult to obtain through wild encounters. This reward structure created incentive to engage with game corner gambling or to purchase coins directly for players who preferred not to gamble. The coin purchase option at steep exchange rates provided accessibility to prizes without forcing engagement with gambling mechanics. Players who disliked slots or card flip could simply buy the coins they needed, though at significant economic cost. This design allowed multiple paths to the same rewards, respecting player preferences about which mechanics they wanted to engage with. The flexibility demonstrated understanding that not all players enjoyed all game systems equally. The Game Corner's presence in multiple regions with different prize inventories encouraged visiting both Johto and Kanto locations to access full range of available rewards. This distribution created collection incentive that extended beyond single location optimization. The differences in prize offerings meant that completionist players needed to earn coins in multiple game corners rather than exhausting just one. This extended engagement across regions rather than concentrating it in single location. The blue card system for storing excess coins prevented players from wasting earnings when they hit maximum capacity. This quality of life feature ensured that successful gambling sessions didn't result in lost coins due to arbitrary storage limits. The blue card's automatic functionality required no player input beyond receiving it initially, demonstrating commitment to removing friction from game systems. These small conveniences accumulated into overall experience that felt polished rather than rough. The lottery corner in Goldenrod's radio tower building allowed daily ticket checking for prizes based on matching ID numbers from owned Pokemon. This daily engagement mechanic encouraged checking in regularly, even when not actively progressing through story content. The prizes scaled with number of matched digits, from low-value items for single-digit matches to Master Ball for perfect 5-digit match. The extreme rarity of Master Ball wins created ongoing hope without reliable expectation. The lottery system incentivized maintaining diverse Pokemon collection with varied ID numbers, rather than keeping only caught or bred specimens. Traded Pokemon from other players brought different IDs that increased match probability. This created secondary trading motivation beyond Pokédex completion, as players sought to diversify their ID number pool. The mathematical improbability of Master Ball wins meant that most players never obtained one through lottery, despite daily checking. The ID number assignment upon starting new game meant that each playthrough had unique lottery outcome potential. Players who reset their games for optimal starter stats also randomized their future lottery odds. This uncontrollable randomness created level playing field where all players had equal theoretical chances regardless of skill or dedication. The pure luck nature of lottery success democratized Master Ball access in theory while ensuring scarcity in practice. The Pokemon printer connection planned for Japanese Crystal allowed printing images of caught Pokemon and trainer information through Game Boy printer peripheral. This physical output of digital achievements created tangible records of in-game accomplishments. The printer functionality never reached Western releases, creating regional disparity in available features. The concept anticipated modern social media sharing of gaming achievements through physical rather than digital means. The mystery gift economy created informal trading networks where players swapped items obtained through random exchanges. The unpredictable nature of mystery gift rewards meant that some players received items they didn't need while lacking ones they wanted. This created natural trading environment where players could negotiate exchanges to obtain desired items. The social interaction facilitated by mystery gift trading extended engagement beyond solo gameplay into community participation. The mystery gift's daily use limitation prevented players from farming exchanges indefinitely, creating scarcity that maintained item value. The requirement for physical proximity to exchange gifts encouraged local playgroups rather than online anonymity. This design philosophy prioritized face to face social interaction over convenient digital connectivity. The system reflected era when local multiplayer dominated portable gaming before wireless internet became ubiquitous. The stadium compatibility, allowing rental Pokemon battles with gold and silver teams, connected handheld and console experiences. Players could battle using their carefully trained teams on television screens with three-dimensional graphics that Game Boy Color couldn't render. This cross-platform functionality added value to both products while demonstrating Nintendo's ecosystem approach. The ability to see favorite Pokemon rendered in higher fidelity created emotional moments for players who had invested hundreds of hours in training. The Pokemon Stadium's storage system provided additional box space through console connection, addressing limitations of Gold and Silver's internal storage. Players who caught extensive collections could store overflow Pokemon in stadium boxes rather than releasing them. This utility function gave stadium value beyond just battling, serving as essential tool for serious collectors. The integration demonstrated how hardware limitations could be overcome through creative use of compatible systems. The time capsule's implementation, requiring both players to select it simultaneously from different generation games, showed sophisticated programming to maintain compatibility. The system prevented trades that would break older games by blocking transfer of items or moves that didn't exist in red, blue, yellow. This protection ensured that backward compatibility didn't corrupt save files or create impossible game states. The careful engineering required for safe cross-generation trading demonstrated technical expertise. The Stadium series of games, including Pokémon Stadium 2, expanded functionality to include mini-games and gym leader castle modes beyond pure battling. These additions created variety that justified purchasing what might otherwise be seen as simple battle visualizer. The mini-games provided accessible entertainment for players who weren't interested in competitive battling. This breadth of content transformed Stadium from niche product into mainstream appeal software. The transfer pack technology, enabling connection between Nintendo 64 and Game Boy cartridges, represented significant hardware achievement for its era. The accessory allowed seamless data transfer between vastly different systems with different processors and memory architectures. This technical accomplishment enabled entire category of cross-platform features that enhanced both handheld and console experiences. The transfer pack's success proved concept of ecosystem integration that would influence future Nintendo hardware. The decision to include both Johto and Kanto in Gold and Silver came late in development, originally not planned as part of the design. The technical achievement of fitting both regions onto limited cartridge space required extreme optimization and compression. Satoru Iwata's programming contributions enabled this expansion beyond original scope. This legendary development story became part of Pokémon mythology, illustrating how individual contributions could dramatically enhance final products. The compressed Kanto region showed what could be accomplished through skillful programming, though some features needed removal to fit memory constraints. The Safari Zone's absence represented most notable cut content, its removal freeing space for other elements. The Cerulean Cave's exclusion simplified Kanto's postgame, but maintained Mount Silver as ultimate challenge. These cuts demonstrated prioritization decisions about which content mattered most for player experience. The level scaling across two regions created challenge curve that started fresh in Johto, then ramped dramatically through Kanto. The wild Pokemon levels in Kanto barely exceeded Johto's Elite Four, creating somewhat awkward power plateau. The gym leaders' teams reached much higher levels, creating spikes in difficulty that forced grinding between challenges. This irregular curve reflected technical constraints in balancing encounters across two full regions within single game. The Mount Silver encounter with Red at Journey's End provided narrative closure that connected Gold and Silver to Red and Blue meaningfully. The silent protagonist from First Generation had become legendary figure training in isolation. This transformation of player character into legendary NPC created meta-narrative about legacy and succession. The battle itself required maximum preparation, with Red's team significantly outleveling anything else in the game. The decision to make Red use Espeon, a second-generation Pokémon, rather than strictly first-generation team, added contemporary element to his legendary status. His team composition suggested he had continued training and adapting to new species discoveries during his isolation. This detail implied that Red remained active trainer rather than frozen relic from past. The updated team created stronger challenge than if he had maintained his original party composition. The weather effects in Gold and Silver appeared only in specific scripted locations rather than as random route features. The rain during rival battles created atmosphere, while the sandstorm on Mount Silver emphasized harsh environment. These predetermined weather patterns ensured consistent aesthetic presentation rather than random variation. The limited weather implementation suggested hardware constraints prevented more dynamic meteorological systems. The beta content discovered through data mining revealed features that were planned but cut before release. Unused Pokémon sprites for beta designs that were replaced with final versions showed iteration process. Removed maps and locations suggested larger world than final product contained. These discoveries provided insight into development decisions and content that didn't make Final Cut due to time or space constraints. The Celebi event's distribution through special download stations in Japan created divide between players who could access events and those who couldn't. The time travel Pokemon remained unobtainable for many Western players during original release period. This regional exclusivity frustrated completionists who couldn't achieve full Pokédex through available methods. Later generations would somewhat address this through more generous event distributions. The GS Ball item required for Celebi encounter existed in game code but lacked distribution method in many regions. Players who data mined to find the item's existence felt frustrated knowing content existed but remained locked. The intentional withholding of Celebi from general access created mystique, but also exclusivity that seemed unfair. Modern players can access Celebi through glitches or using modern distribution methods, but original audiences remained largely unable to complete this event. The Pokemon Communication Center that replaced Pokemon Centers in Japanese Crystal provided news updates and communication features unavailable in Western releases. This facility represented an attempt to create ongoing content delivery in Era before reliable internet connectivity. The feature's limitation to Japanese Crystal created significant version differences that affected available content. Western players missed entire category of social features present in Japanese release. The mobile adapter's failure to achieve widespread adoption meant that planned online features never reached full potential. The infrastructure required for cellular connectivity in Game Boy games proved too expensive and complicated for mass market. This technical limitation prevented realization of ambitious multiplayer features that would eventually succeed in later generations. The mobile adapter's legacy exists primarily as what might have been rather than what was achieved. The Crystal version's release as enhanced third version established pattern that would continue through several generations. The version included minor story additions, slight mechanical improvements, and aesthetic changes without constituting entirely new game. This practice of releasing updated versions allowed developers to address feedback while generating additional sales. The value proposition for players who already owned gold or silver varied based on how much they valued incremental improvements. The animated sprites in Crystal represented that version's most visible enhancement, with Pokemon moving during battle encounters. This animation brought additional life to combat without requiring complete sprite overhaul. The movement patterns varied by species, with flying Pokemon bobbing while grounded creatures shifted weight. This attention to species specific animation demonstrated commitment to enhanced presentation within Crystal's improvements. The female player character option in Crystal marked series' first acknowledgement that not all players were male. The gendered choice provided representation without significantly affecting gameplay mechanics. This inclusion addressed feedback from female players who wanted avatar options reflecting their gender. The delayed implementation suggested that developers initially designed primarily for male audience before recognizing broader demographics. The Battle Tower's introduction in Crystal provided endgame challenge separate from story completion or Pokédex filling. The tower offered consecutive battles against random opponents with increasing difficulty. This competitive environment tested team building and strategic planning without narrative context. The tower's presence influenced competitive community by providing in-game venue for testing strategies that would later dominate organized tournaments. The Battle Tower's reward system provided rare items for successful streaks, creating incentive beyond simple victory satisfaction. The prizes included evolution items, held items, and vitamins that were difficult to obtain otherwise. This reward structure encouraged repeated tower challenges rather than single completion attempts. The escalating difficulty ensured that only highly optimized teams could achieve maximum rewards, creating aspirational goals for competitive players. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed drifting through these quiet moments, there's another video waiting on the left of your screen. Let it play while you rest. You might discover something gentle before sleep takes you again.